Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Joins the Party with a Healing Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku wasn't sure when the pain started. All he knew is that it would never end. There was no respite, not even in his dreams. The closest thing to peace that he knew was counting the number of tiles on the ceiling in his room. There were 78.5 to be exact. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Breathe in. Breathe out. Repeat. Izuku had always dreamed of having a quirk. It didn't have to be a flashy one like Kaken's or versatile like All Might's. He just wanted a quirk that he could use to save people. He wished he had remained quirkless. Izuku's quirk manifested late. It came in when he was 7. It was unusually late, but not unreasonably so. It came in one sunny afternoon while he was following Kaken and the extras through the forest. While their relationship had started to strain because Kaken thought he was better than everyone else because of his hero quirk, their friendship wasn't quite past the point of no return. The forest was their favorite place to play. There were no adults to tell them off for playing too rough or for using their quirks too much. It was only the 5 of them and they ruled the world in the confines of those trees. Forward march, and here we go, members of the agency Bakugusai. Kaken's voice cut off abruptly as he lost his footing. His feet slid out from underneath him, and he fell down into the churning water of the creek below. It was a long fall for such a small child. Despite the choppy texture of the water, the current wasn't all that violent. The rocks at the bottom were smooth and were cradled by a soft mud that inhabited the lowest level of the creek. There were no sharp edges in sky above or below the water. All the same, it hurt when Kaken landed. Kaken! Izuku scrambled off of the log and down the rocky shore, desperate to see the state of his friend. Are you okay? I'm fine, Deku. I don't need your help, Kaken said as he slowly tried to stand up. He was only halfway before he yelped and grabbed at his ankle, tears starting to form in his eyes. You're hurt. Come on, we need to get you to Mom and Auntie, they can help, Izuku said as he held out his hand. Come on, Kaken, you can't be a hero if you're hurt. He grumbled under his breath, unhappy about Izuku being right. Fine. But I'm still the hero and I'm still in charge, don't forget that. Izuku nodded vigorously. Of course. Now come on, give me your hand so we can get out of the water, it's kinda cold. Kaken took his hand and stood the rest of the way up. That's weird. My ankle doesn't hurt anymore. I don't need your help anymore, Deku. That just goes to show how tough I am. The small boy smirked as he brought himself up to his full height, which wasn't that impressive. Now come on, I think we can sucker Auntie Inko into giving us ice cream like last time. What do you say, Deku? Izuku didn't answer. The small boy had fallen into the river and was now clutching his ankle, crying openly. IID didn't even tr trip. Why does it hurt? There was no logical explanation as to why Izuku felt pain. He had taken care while climbing down, making sure to only place his feet where he was sure the ground was stable. When wading through the water to Kaken, he had tested each step before placing his full weight down. His 2 feet never left the ground, and yet, he was reacting as if he were the one that fell all those feet from the log that spanned above. Despite his brash nature, Kaken wasn't heartless. He was arrogant and proud, but he wasn't cruel, at least, not yet. Despite Deku being a Deku, he was still his best friend and his best sidekick, despite his quirk not appearing yet. Tsubasa, go get Auntie Inko and my mom. Deku's hurt. Kaken grabbed Izuku firmly, but not roughly. Let's get out of the water. You were right, it is kinda cold. He half-dragged, half-carried his friend out of the water, not being quite as overly cautious as to where he placed his feet. He looked up at where the others were standing, making sure that Tsubasa wasn't wasting any time. Thankfully, the boy was already gone. I bet Auntie Inko will make you Katsudon if you ask, she's always been weak for when you cry. Izuku nodded shakily. Why, his voice shook, thick with tears. And my mom probably would. Kaken paused once he saw Izuku's eyes for the first time since he fell. They were as red as blood. If you play this up, you could probably get her to buy that matcha cake that you like. Nothing he said could distract Izuku from the pain. Just wait a little bit longer. I'm sure you just need to ice your ankle. What seemed like an eternity passed before Tsubasa arrived with Inko, Mitsuki, and Masu. The three adults were all frazzled, Inko the most and Mitsuki the least. The sun was just beginning to kiss the horizon, just starting to paint the sky with shy reds and timid yellows. Aizu baby! Masaru was barely able to keep Inko from climbing down to the creek. I'll grab the boys, Inko, don't worry. If either need to be carried, I don't think you're quite strong enough to make it back up. Stay here with Mitsuki and make sure the other boys are okay, Masaru said as he gently passed Inko over to his wife. She readily took hold of her friend and began to talk to the other boys, asking what had happened and whether or not they were hurt. Hey there, Aizu, Masaru smiled gently. Let's get out of here, alright? Katsuki, I'm guessing you're alright to climb up on your own. He nodded. Of course. I'm not that weak, let's go. Masaru gently lifted Izuku into his arms, keeping one hand free so he could rebalance or catch them if need be. As he said, Kaken didn't need any help. He ran ahead, as sure-footed as a mountain goat. Mitsuki, do you have blankets in the car? Katsuki and Aizu-chan are both soaking wet. I don't want them getting too cold. She nodded. Yeah, there should be a few in the back. How is our little man? Well, he's definitely hurt somewhere. He's grabbing at his ankle, but there aren't any marks on it. He may have twisted it. We should probably take him to the doctor just to be sure. Have Katsuki checked as well? These little guys told me that Katsuki fell off of the log into the water. He looks fine, but you can never be too sure, Mitsuki said as she took Kaken's hand, ignoring his protests about how he was too old and too cool to be seen holding his mother's hand. You just have the one car. I don't think all of us will fit in it. Inko's eyes scattered between the 5 small boys and the 2 oldest Bakugas. Mitsuki started to lead the way out, calling out over her shoulder, "It's no problem, Inks. I can walk these 3 home. They don't live very far away. You and Masaru can take the boys to the doctor. I can meet you there if it takes long." The walk out of the woods seemed to pass all too quickly. The boys had always viewed the forest as an immense domain with no limits, but the adults had made quick work of leaving. The adults were boring. They didn't stop every few feet to look at a beetle or a funky vine. They just walked right through with no care for the adventures that they were missing out on. The car was waiting near the entrance. It was parked crookedly and had partially jumped the curb. Masaru helped the 2 small boys into the car before climbing into the driver's seat. Inko's hands were shaking from nerves as she struggled to buckle her seatbelt. It's all right. You can start driving. I'll get this eventually. Inko gave the 3 of them a strained smile. Let's just get these 2 checked out. Neither Inko nor Masaru had noticed that both boys sitting in the back had red eyes. As Masaru pulled away, Kaken watched his mother disappear into the distance with the extras. The only sounds in the car were the radio softly playing pop music and Izuku's muted sobs. Kaken slowly held out his hand and held Izuku's, trying to give him some semblance of comfort. "I'm sorry, but there isn't anything physically wrong with him," the doctor said as he stood up from examining Izuku's ankle. "I don't think he's faking the pain he's feeling, but I can't find anything that could cause what he's feeling. Was he hit by any quirks?" Kaken shook his head. "No. I already said what happened. We were playing and I slipped into the creek. He came down to help me out of the water and he started crying." Masaru looked between the 2 boys, a slight frown marring his calm face. "Inko, Izuku's quirk is still unknown, right?" Izuku's mother nodded. While she was still upset, she was at least comprehensible. "We took him to a doctor a couple months ago and he said that Izuku has a quirk, it just hadn't presented yet. If that's so, then maybe this pain has to do with his quirk. I'm sorry to ask again, Katsuki, but could you tell me again exactly what happened?" The blonde boy was obviously starting to get annoyed. They had already been at the hospital for over an hour. Neither boy had anything wrong with them, and yet they were held back. "I guess. Me, Deku, and the extras were walking across a log. I slipped and fell into the creek below. Deku came down to see if I was okay. It stopped hurting by the time he started crying. After that, I told Tsubasa to get Auntie Inko." The doctor paused, his face showing a light bulb went off. You said it stopped hurting when Izuku started crying. Where exactly did it hurt when you fell? Kaken looked down at himself. My ankle, I guess. He gestured to his right ankle. The doctor nodded slowly. One more question. When exactly did the pain stop? Did it stop before Izuku got to you? Or did it stop once he reached you? Kaken's face scrunched up in concentration as he tried to remember. I think it stopped after he got to me, but not right away. It stopped once he took my hand to help me up. His eyes turned red too. I think I know what happened then, the doctor said as he smiled. I believe that little Izuku has some form of a healing quirk. Healing quirks are quite tricky. The more useful they are, the bigger the drawback. If what Katsuki is telling us is true, then it seems that Izuku touching him healed his injuries from the fall. I suspect the pain that he's feeling right now is the residual pain that Katsuki felt. I'm guessing that his red eyes are just the physical tell that his quirk is active. A healing quirk? Really? I didn't know healing quirks ran in your family, Inko. They don't, at least not that I know of. My parents had similar quirks to me and I don't know enough about Hisashi's family to say for sure. Inko trailed off. Oh, don't think about it too hard. Healing quirks are usually the result of random mutation. It's very rare for them to be passed on. Izuku was just chosen by fate. The doctor wrote something on his clipboard as he stood. I suggest you take Izuku to see a quirk specialist tomorrow. There's one that specializes in healing quirks here. She can help you figure out the specifics of his quirk. Until then, all I can recommend for the pain is doing whatever feels best to him. Heating and icing should be fine as long as he doesn't do it for too long. If it's really bad, then he can take a low dose of over-the-counter pain meds. Beyond that, there isn't much I can do until we know more about his quirk specifics. Masaru nodded and lifted Izuku off of the exam table. Thank you so much for your help. We'll make sure he gets in as soon as possible tomorrow. Perfect, I'll leave a note for her so she knows to expect you. I'll send my notes ahead so she can prepare. Inko thanked the doctor profusely as Masaru led the way out of the hospital. Izuku had long since stopped crying, he was only sniffling on occasion now. I have a quirk? Deku. This means you can really be my sidekick. Kaken was vibrating with excitement. I can blow the bad guys up and you can save the people. A smile quickly appeared on his face. Yeah, I'll save the most people. Just watch. Save people? How foolish. It truly was a childish dream. His longing to save people is what landed him in this small hospital room with exactly 78.5 ceiling tiles. His body thrummed with pain and the air was thick with the scent of antiseptics and desperation. Izuku, there's another hero we need you to heal. He turned his head a fraction to look at the nurse hovering in the doorway. You can get more pain meds once you heal him. Pain meds. Who would have thought that a 9-year-old would have a pain med dependency? It was cruel. It was cruel to make him heal without a way to ease the pain. It was cruel to force a dependency on him. Who is it? Which hero am I saving this time? The nurse looked down at her pager. I believe it's Uwabami. She was helping with an evacuation when there was a partial collapse. Izuku slowly nodded. All right. How injured is she? Now Izuku, you know I can't tell you that. He gave her a deadpan look. I'll know how injured she was when I heal her. I couldn't care less about patient confidentiality, I just want to know what I'll have to deal with. She sighed softly before answering. She has a broken leg and collarbone, mild burns, and a moderate concussion. It was far from the worst he had healed, but that didn't mean it would hurt any less. Healing a single hero wasn't all that bad, but Izuku found himself healing up to 3 heroes in a single day. The HPSC, the ones that owned and ran the hospital he was currently working at, were absolutely ruthless. Once they found out the limits of his quirk, they utilized him to his quirk's fullest capacity. I can handle that. I will need pain meds once I'm done with her then. I won't be able to sleep without them. All right, Mrs. Midoriya, I believe I have the full details about Izuku's quirk, the nice specialist said with a smile. It seems that he has a very powerful touch-activated healing quirk where the only drawback is experiencing the pain of the original injury. I don't believe there are any limitations as to what he can heal, the only limits are his own ability to manage the pain. If I'm being honest, this is the strongest healing quirk I've ever seen in my 10 years on the job. Inko had tears in her eyes as she looked at her little boy proudly. Meanwhile, Izuku was skiing on a rather large lollipop that the specialist had given him. I have a document printed out with a few specifics, but it should be a fairly easy read for you. My number and email are printed at the bottom. Feel free to contact me if you ever need anything. I consulted his doctor and we both agree that it should be fine to give him some stronger pain meds until the pain fully disappears. The directions for usage will be given to you at the pharmacy. Lucky for us, you should know immediately when he no longer needs the meds as his eyes are red when his quirk is active, she said as she handed over a small packet. I'll see if I can find a healer to mentor him. Healing quirks are special, they can be used in public as long as a licensed healer is present. Once he has a mentor, he can start training with it. He'll be in very high demand, I can promise you both that. Inko nodded slowly, trying to take in everything. You said that it's touch activated. What would you recommend to avoid it being activated every time he touches someone? The best way to avoid that is to use gloves. Wear long sleeves and breathes to avoid it activating when brushing against someone. Izuku never wore gloves in the hospital. Gloves were just another layer to take off when he had to heal someone. What if someone was on the verge of death and he wasn't able to get a piece of skin free in time to heal them? He could heal anyone with a heartbeat, he can't heal the dead. Here she is Izuku, a doctor said as he was led into Iwabami's hospital room. Despite only having just arrived, there were already numerous vases filled with fresh flowers. Izuku nodded and stepped towards her bed. 2 nurses stood on either side of him, ready to catch him in case the pain was too much. Without any ceremony, he stretched out his hand and placed it on Iwabami's. His eyes glowed briefly before returning to their usual blood red. Since coming to the hospital, Izuku's eyes were never his natural green for more than 12 hours. As soon as the glow in his eyes disappeared, Iwabami's various injuries disappeared, leaving no trace. She began to stir, groaning softly in her sleep. Izuku flinched from the onslaught of pain. Each nurse on his side took a step closer, their hands extending towards his elbows to help hold him up if need be. Their readiness wasn't needed at all, he righted himself fairly quickly. Since we're done here, I'll be going back to my room. I want my meds in the next 30 minutes so I can get some sleep before I have to heal someone else. Heroes were always fighting crime, so Izuku was healing them at all hours. Thankfully, the doctors at the hospital were kind enough to only wake him when a case was serious. If a hero came in with severe but not deadly in the slightest injuries, then they were doped up on pain meds, put under observation, and waited until the morning. Izuku made his way back to his room, not even bothering to wait for a response. He was promised his pain meds and those that worked there knew that he would only heal if he was given what he wanted. It was cruel. It was cruel to make him heal without a way to ease the pain. It was cruel to force a dependency on him, and yet, here he was. He climbed into his bed, not bothering to close the door behind himself as he knew a nurse would be stopping by soon within 4. He made himself as comfortable as possible, rearranging the various pillows and blankets the HPSC had gifted to him to make sure he was comfortable. 78.5 tiles expanded above his head. Never more, never less. That 1/2 tile always bothered him. Why couldn't the builders just use smaller tiles? If they did that, then they wouldn't have to worry about cutting them to size. Izuku didn't acknowledge the nurse as he walked in with the 4. He simply unburied his arm from the blankets and held it out to him. He gave no thanks once the needle was in and the meds were flowing. He hadn't even felt the needle prick. It had been a long time since he had cried over something as small as a needle. The opioids slowly swirled into every corner of his body. The tension melted from his small frame as a feeling of peace settled over him. He sighed softly as he felt the beginning of sleep toying with the edge of his mind. The doctors were trying to cut back on the amount of drags they gave him. They were scared of him getting an addiction. It was already too late. Izuku's eyes drifted close with no resistance. His breathing slowly evened out until he was dead asleep. He wouldn't be woken for any reason, with the exception of an emergency. Sadly, it wasn't long before one arrived. A heartbeat. How simple. How often it's taken for granted. Only appreciated once it's gone. Izuku, a nurse yelled as they pulled him from his sleep. Get up, we have an emergency in room 10. The boy wasn't given a chance to pull shoes on. He was pulled out of the door by the wrist and pushed into the room. He stumbled a few steps as he took in the sight before him. The hero, whoever they were, looked strangely peaceful. The doctors and nurses around him were running about, instructing a nurse to do her compressions harder and deeper. We're losing him. I can't find a wound. Izuku was pushed forward, towards the bed. A strange feeling settled over him as he stretched his hand out. He was familiar with this process. He wasn't sure why the doctors were panicking so much as he was there. The hero would find in a few seconds. Touch him now, Izuku. He placed his hand on the hero's bare arm. Nothing happened. Izuku frowned and lifted his hand. He grabbed a sterile piece of gauze and wiped the area before placing his hand down again. Nothing. Izuku was filled by a sense of emptiness. Something was missing. A puzzle piece that should have been there seemed to have been lost. The emptiness grew inside of him. It is all warmth from his bones. Never before had he felt so vulnerable, so brittle, so useless. No heartbeat. The thing missing was his heartbeat. There was no constant thrumming rhythm echoing through his veins. Izuku had never tried healing someone that didn't have a heartbeat before. It was strange. A lack of heartbeat didn't mean that someone was dead. It just meant that they were very nearly dead. A heartbeat can be restarted, but what happens if it can't? Lube-dub, lube-dub, lube-dub. Izuku's hand was almost frozen in place. He wanted to pull away. A sense of dream passed over his already brittle state. He knew something bad would happen if he didn't take his hand off, if he didn't stop attempting to heal the hero with no heartbeat. The amount of time compressions was done was meaningless. If the heart didn't restart and maintain a rhythm, then the brain would eventually die of oxygen deprivation. This is considered by most to the true moment of death. He's not healing. Izuku, don't move your hand. There's still a chance we can bring him back. He was frozen in place. His eyes didn't glow, they remained a dull blood red. He could feel nothing, and it wasn't from the pain meds. The meds had long since worn off. He's not coming back. Stop compressions. Time of death. 7:42. The doctors and nurses began to disconnect everything from the nameless hero. None of them took notice of the small boy that was frozen in place. None of them would notice him until he screamed and collapsed to the ground. Life is a fickle thing. The chance being brought into existence is almost zero. Once life is granted, it is so easily lost. I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya, but your husband died in a car crash yesterday morning on his way to work. Inko collapsed to the ground, clutching the phone as she sobbed. Inko's love for her husband was no secret. Everyone knew she had been heartbroken when his work required him move abroad. It was only supposed to be for 3 years. Hisashi Midoriya would never consciously set foot in Japan again. Izuku was indifferent. He knew he was supposed to love his father, but he hardly knew the man. Hisashi had left when he was 6 and he was now 8. 2 years wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of life, but it was a quarter of the small boy's life. The only memories of his father that he had was a laugh that often left singe marks and calloused hands that were amazingly gentle. Inko Midoriya would eventually stop crying after 3 hours. Izuku moved his mother. With his entire heart. She helped him throughout his entire childhood as any good mother should. She placed limits on what he could heal with his quirk, just so he wasn't too bothered by pain. A boy your age shouldn't have to handle pain. Pain is something reserved for those of us experienced enough to forget it. Izuku wasn't experienced in handling pain, much less forgetting it. What he is familiar with is sadness, but not because of himself. He is well acquainted with sadness because of his loving mother. The day Hisashi died was the day Inko was unable to forget pain. There was no experience she had that allowed her to put the death of her other half aside. Izuku stayed with the Bakugas for a week. He understood why, but he still didn't like it. His mother had always been there for him. Why couldn't he be there for her? Why did his mother have to suffer alone like this? After the week passed, she began to push others away. She said she was tired, but Izuku knew that it was more than that. He could see the tension taking over her shoulders. He saw it in the way her hands shook any time she tried to pour herself a cup of tea. She was not okay, and Izuku knew, but she didn't. The men from the HPSC came 3 days after Hisashi was finally laid to rest in the Midoriya grave. "You have our sincerest condolences, Mrs. Midoriya. I can't even imagine the stress and sadness you feel right now." The man's eyes were hidden behind tinted glasses. He wore a smart suit that was flawless. "My men and I are here to offer you and your son an opportunity, one that can hopefully take some stress off of your shoulders. It would help you both in the long run." Inko said she would listen. Izuku would come to regret staying for the discussion. "Your son's Quirk is absolutely amazing. We want to take him in and train him. We'll set him up for a successful future while giving you time to grieve in peace. You won't have to worry about anything except for yourself." It was a good deal. Even Izuku had to admit that. He would miss his mother, of course, but he would do anything to help her with the emotional pain she felt. "Mrs. Midoriya, you'll be able to visit your son whenever you want. We'll help him learn the limits of his Quirk in a safe environment and nurture his bright mind." That would turn out to be a lie. "While he's with us, he'll technically be working, so you'll be compensated. You won't have to worry about financials ever again." It was a deal with the devil that neither could refuse. The first thing Izuku noticed when he woke up was the steady beep of a heart monitor. Opening his eyes revealed that his body was covered in monitors and needles of every sort. He had long since stopped feeling something as trivial as a needle. He wasn't sure how long he had been asleep, but it must have been a long time, as he felt no residual pain from the heroes he had healed. He slowly pushed himself up, taking care to not jostle the equipment surrounding himself. He may have not been able to feel it, but he knew that ripping the needles out would only harm him. A nurse appeared in the doorway on his room, presumably sent after an alarm went off once his vitals changed. "Izuku, you're awake." She was clearly surprised and relieved. "Here, let me help you up." She stepped into the room, next to his bed. After pressing a few buttons, his bed rose so he was able to sit up effortlessly. "There you are." She smiled in the fake way most medical professionals do. "I'm sure you have questions?" Izuku didn't dignify that with a response. "Right? Well, you've been in a coma for 4 days. You collapsed while attempting to heal a patient. You went down as soon as all brain function ceased. We believe that your Quirk is unable to heal someone if they don't have a heartbeat." For days. He had been in a coma for 4 days. Izuku had always wondered what would happen if someone died while he attempted to heal them. It seemed that he had an answer now. He couldn't take on their pain, as corpses could feel no pain. Corpses couldn't experience pain. What did have was a complete lack of sensation, which one could argue is the worst of all. The death of someone while Izuku tried to heal them led to a similar lack of sensation, a coma. He wasn't able to recall anything. There weren't any vague memories of sound or touch as the nurse had hoped. He couldn't remember a single detail of his 4-day break from healing. It was the most relaxed he had ever been in his entire life. "We're happy you're awake again. We have a lot of patients waiting to be healed." Izuku exhaled. He was tired. 9 years old, and he held hero society on his shoulders. All he wanted was of it to stop. What did he want to stop? Everything. "Can I have something to eat before I see the patients?" Izuku asked softly. She nodded. "Of course, I'll bring you someone that'll be gentle on your stomach. You haven't had solids in 4 days, so we don't want to go too fast." Did she hear the hypocrisy? She either didn't care, or she was stupid. She disappeared through the door to grab his food. Once she was out of sight, Izuku collapsed bonelessly into the pillows. He had only just woken up, and yet he was already exhausted. 78.5 tiles on the ceiling, 78.5 exactly. He had counted each numerous times and was familiar with the shape of each. The tile that he assigned to number 13 was slightly darker than the others. Tile 16 had the beginning of a crack in the corner. Tile 42 had water damage. The pile of thank you presents and flowers continued to grow at his bedside, but he ignored every last colorfully wrapped package. A present would do nothing to stop the pain. The food he was brought was bland and lukewarm at best. Heaven forbid he burn himself after he woke up from a coma. The nurses and doctors that worked at the HPSC Hero Hospital were all numb to some extent. None of them found a problem with putting the world's pain onto the shoulders of a 9-year-old. Why would they care when he made their lives easier? Why would they care when the HPSC said it was okay to work him to the bone? He hadn't been outside of the hospital grounds in over a year, keeping him safe presumably. He was a bird in a cage. They never bothered to clip his wings because he was too young to fly. A doctor he had never seen before entered the room. He had a bald head, round glasses, and the bushiest mustache Izuku had ever seen. He seated himself into the chair beside Izuku's bed slowly. "Hello there, young man, I'm Dr. Garaki," the old doctor said. "I want to talk about a few things with you." Izuku didn't bother to pause in his eating. He nodded his head once to signify he should start talking. "Well," his voice was soft, "I just wanted to let you know that if you ever tire of life here, I can help you leave." The look on Izuku's face must have given away his skepticism. "I know, you have no reason to believe me, but no one's ever given you the hope of leaving before, have they?" Izuku froze mid-bite. He slowly lowered his hand, placing the spoon back into his bowl. "No, no one's ever even hinted at the chance of me leaving. The ones that work here are convinced I'll exist for them and eventually die when they no longer need me." Dr. Garaki nodded sadly. "I figured that was the case. Well, my employer and I both hate how a person's fate is dictated by their quirk in this modern society. If you help us, we will set you free from this cage. If you free me, I won't heal you. I won't be guilted into healing. Of course, not my boy, we weren't planning on doing that at all. Tell me, do you resent the quirk that you have?" Did he hate his quirk? It healed so many heroes and kept so many from early deaths, but it had caused him so much pain. He hadn't seen his mother in over a year. He hadn't seen his best friend, aunt, or uncle in just as long. He was 9 years old and had a drag dependency. It wasn't fair. "I hate this quirk. I wish I had been quirkless, this has only brought me pain." The old doctor seemed satisfied with that answer. "My boy, what would you say if my employer and I had a way to take away your quirk?" 3 weeks passed since his coma. His days were filled with the usual activities, healing heroes, writhing in pain, and counting the ceiling tiles. He held out for the day they replaced the tiles in his room, so he actually had to recount them. Izuku thought that he knew pain. He thought he traversed hell daily because of his quirk. That's what he thought until the number 1 hero was brought in. "Get Izuku now." Izuku was pulled from his precious sleep to sounds of his name being screamed. His eyes had been blood red for 21 days straight. He had no break. After over a year of near-endless pain, the boy was reaching his limit. That is, if he hadn't already passed it. He was given no time to finish waking up. A nurse simply gathered him into his arms and ran with him. The jolting was a good way to finish waking him up, but it did nothing to help his pain. Izuku was brought into a room with the largest hero he had ever seen. It was almost impossible to discern the identity through the blood and gore that covered his body, but the reds and blues were unmistakable. All Might. Izuku was set down roughly next to the bed. The constant beeping of a monitor showed that the number 1 hero wasn't on death's doorstep, but he was close. All Might was lucky that he was unconscious. The pain alone could have snuffed out the remaining embers of his life. Izuku was meant to take on that pain. His eyes filled with tears and he backed away. "Peel, please, I can't heal him. If I heal him, I'll die from the pain." It was the first time Izuku had begged in over a year. He had quickly learned that begging gets you nothing, but all of his lessons were erased from his mind as he took in the magnum opus of his career as a healer. "Do you really want the number 1 hero to die because of you? Do you really think your comfort is more important than the safety of all of Japan? You'll get your pain meds, just heal him," a doctor yelled at him as they cut away All Might's costume. "Nurse, inject him with his usual meds. It won't kick in time, but it'll take the edge off until we get him back to his room." Izuku flinched as the needle pierced his skin despite not feeling it. He slowly held out his hand, wanting to do the right thing, but still terrified. A tall man that Izuku wasn't familiar with slammed into the room. "How is he?" The new man was intimidatingly tall. He was altogether plain looking except for his hair, which was dark green with golden streaks. He'll be fine once Izuku touches him. His injuries will heal almost instantly. The tall man turned his attention towards Izuku. As he did, an alarm went off on the heart monitor. All Might's heart was becoming irregular and thready, too much so for comfort. What are you waiting for, boy? Heal him. The tall man reached out, putting his hand over Izuku's and pressing the small boy's hand to All Might's forearm. The boy convulsed where he stood as a blood-curdling scream was ripped from his lungs. His eyes shone a sickeningly sweet shade of crimson. The tall man had no remorse. He was focused on how quickly the injuries disappeared from his beloved #1 hero. Izuku's screams did not end once All Might was fully healed. His screams echoed throughout the hospital. His screams were the proof of a grave sin. Dr. Garaki had said that getting him out would take time but could be managed easily through faking his death. Izuku had come to trust the older man. He held the brightest future Izuku had ever hoped of. A future where he no longer had a quirk that only caused him suffering. I'll come by in 3 weeks. When I come, I'll have a nurse give you an injection. The injection will slow your heartbeat down until it can't be detected by heart monitors. You'll still be alive, but barely. Izuku nodded. He was beyond ready to accept whatever was necessary to escape. Honestly, if this works, I'm fine with dying. It shouldn't be that hard, right? They give me all the drugs I want. It shouldn't take too much for me to overdose. The doctor chuckled darkly. Don't worry, my boy, if you die, my employer and I have the resources to bring you back. The plan is to get you out without death, but if need be, we will help you die so you can get out. How kind of them. Izuku wasn't aware in the slightest. Every single nerve in his body was burning. He was confused as to how he wasn't dead yet. This level of pain shouldn't be possible. He had felt phantom pain before. It was common when healing heroes that had extra appendages. This was different. He felt as if half of his organs had been ripped out. He felt no void inside himself. The ceiling tiles blurred together as he was rushed back to his room. An alarm was going off. An alarm? Oh no, he was still screaming. That's why his throat hurt. Did his throat really hurt? Or was the pain from the smoke and debris All Might inhaled during his fight? He wasn't sure where his pain and where All Might stopped. burning. Pain. Can't breathe. He was back in his room. He didn't remember a second of the trip. He was being suffocated from within. Get him morphine. If he doesn't calm down, he'll hurt himself. And 4 was attached. He was attached to N4 more often than not. As an addict, he had no problem with it. Not an addict, he had a man-made dependence. It wasn't by his design. It was forced onto him because life isn't fair. He tasted blood. His own? Most likely. He couldn't tell if he was biting his tongue or not. That pain was just a single drop in an ocean. Forcing him to take on this pain was the greatest sin of the HPC. They would be URN for this. Breathe? Can't breathe. Breathing hurts. Hurts more to not breathe. What should he do? Should breathe. Want to live. Can't breathe. His chest rattled as he in a shallow breath. It didn't help. More rattling. More shallow breaths. He vomited. He isn't sure where it went, but it went somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Sheet. How much opioids has he had today? Too much. Overdose. Losing him. The pain was muted now. A strange sense of peace started to settle over the boy's small body. The last he felt like this was before he fell into the coma, but this was serene, not terrifying. How easy it would be to succumb. What is he succumbing to? He isn't sure. All he knows is that the pain will end if he does. Need the pain to end. He needs the pain to end. I need the pain to end. Hold on, Izuku. He didn't. Death wasn't a light at the end of the tunnel, it was being thrown into a sunless ocean. The waves crashed over his head, but he had no sense of what was up and what was down. Trying to take a breath led to a mouthful of brine. No matter how much he coughed, he was eternally choking. Izuku! The water was shockingly cold as it repeatedly hit his face. The froth of the waves decorated his skin. It was the only thing keeping his skin from hitting the open air. Ake up. He swallowed a mouthful, struggling to breath as his mouth fills with more and more water. My boy! The water was suddenly gone from his mouth. Breathing suddenly became easier. Open your eyes, Izuku. His eyes snapped open. Izuku died at 6:36 p.m. The cause of death was opioid overdose. Silence hung over the hospital as his body was rolled away. His body did not look peaceful in death. He was too skinny, skin was cracked, lips were blue. His limbs were spread out at awkward angle, bruises from the IVs littering both arms. Death was not peaceful for him. Take him to the morgue. The doctors and nurses were silent as they cleaned up his room. They were sorry, but not because the small boy died. They were sorry because the HPSC would come after them for their incompetency. This cannot reach the public. The fact that we were using them is bad enough. His death would spark outrage. No one noticed that the doctor that wheeled his body wasn't employed at that hospital. No one noticed that the doctor that wheeled his body away wasn't scheduled to visit that day. No one wanted to face the cause of their shame, so no one thought to question why Dr. Garaki was there that day. It's all right, my boy. I'll have you fixed up in no time, the doctor said as he wheeled the gurney away. The morgue hadn't been used in weeks. There was no use for it with Izuku around. The room was bathed in shadows, but Dr. Garaki was not afraid. The old doctor pulled out his phone and dialed the number he needed. Kurogiri, I need you to warp me. No one ever thinks that they'll be able to pay respects to their own grave, and yet here Izuku was. He knelt in front of the Midoriya family grave, carefully laying a simple bouquet of narcissuses on the cool marble. The grave was clean, which was unusual considering all of the Midoriyas were dead. Hi, Mom. Izuku's voice was soft as he lit a single stick of incense. You know, for a long time I was angry that you left me. Now, I see that you had a good reason for leaving me there. The cemetery was silent. The sun had yet to kiss the horizon to start the day. As a result, the air was cool and filled with a faint mist. The only company Izuku had were the ones buried under the solid ground. They didn't tell me you died. I didn't get to go to the funeral. I have a lot of wishes right now, but most of them have to do with the past and I can't change the past. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Tears slipped down the boy's face. He shifted so that he was sitting on the stones in front of the grave. He hugged his legs to his chest, burying his face in his knees. Why did you have to leave me? She didn't respond as the dead have no lungs. Izuku believed in ghosts, but he knew his mother's spirit couldn't offer him any solace. No birds sang, they wept. Their melancholy calls started to fill the skies as the world began to wake. This told Izuku he had to leave. He was dead, he couldn't be seen visiting his own grave. Footsteps, faint but definitely there, rang out. The cemetery was a labyrinth filled with twisting rows. It was nearly impossible to stumble upon someone else by chance. The small boy quickly stood, dusting himself off. He pulled a small phone out of his pocket, a phone given to him by the cloud man named Kurogiri. He began to dial a number but was cut off the cessation of the footsteps. Izuku looked up slowly and met the red eyes of Katsuki Baku. The vase that he had been carrying shattered on the unforgiving ground, scattering chrysanthemums and shards of ceramic. Izuku. He rubbed at his eyes violently before taking several steps closer. I thought my therapist said I would stop seeing you. Izuku's eyes teared up as he saw his friend for the first time in well over a year. Kaken, it's me. I swear I'm real. Katsuki's eyes widened in disbelief. You've never talked back before. What the hell is this? This must be some sort of sick trick. Izuku ran forward, closing the distance between them. He pulled his friend into the tightest hug he had ever given. Every emotion that he had ever felt in the hospital was encompassed in that single touch. It almost burned, but Katsuki was used to fire. Oh my God, Katsuki began to cry. He clung to the smaller boy as hard as he could. What the hell? Where have you been? You died. The two of them slowly sunk to the ground, far too overwhelmed to handle staying upright. I didn't die. Well, I did, but only recently. Recently? Deku, you died on March 15th. You died over a year ago. Katsuki's voice was thick with tears and confusion. How are you okay? What? I was at the hospital on that day. I died 3 weeks ago in the hospital from complications. Complications from doctors' incompetency. I was brought back to life a little over a week ago. The hospital? You died in a car accident. You died in a FING car accident when Auntie Inko ran off of the road. The building frustration was clear in the other boy. Kaken. I haven't seen my mother since I was sent away after my father died. The last time I saw her was when she dropped me off at the HPSC Hero Hospital. She never called or wrote after that. I thought she was still grieving. Katsuki was silent for a moment. She went back for you. She told my mom she wanted you back, that sending you away was a mistake. She went to the hospital on March 15th and checked you out to bring you home. You crashed on the way. It killed both of you instantly. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But I don't understand. I never saw her. I never left the hospital. Did you see my body? He shook his head slowly. No, they cremated your body without letting anyone see you. They said you were too gruesome to be seen during a funeral. We were able to see Auntie though. Izuku sighed softly, understanding washing over him. Another strike against the HPSC. Coming back to life wasn't as easy as they made it look in the movies. He didn't delicately blink as he opened his eyes. He didn't gasp softly as life filled his heart again. Coming back to life was like clawing his way out of quicksand. Every movement pulled him deeper down. Every attempt to blink spread the fire further in his eyes. Every breath was forced from his lungs as the sand strangled him. The world blurred as he finally forced his eyes open. Everything slowly came into focus, colors and lines becoming crisp. His limbs still felt as if they were made of lead, but moving them no longer felt futile. He was certainly and verifiably alive. Izuku slid his fore out with practiced ease, slowly sitting up. He stood up on uncertain legs, stumbling and grasping onto anything close for balance. He slowly looked around the room, seeing that he was in a cavern-based lab. The walls were all made of naturally occurring stone, all rough edges. Roughly cut stone was accented by smooth pipes and wires, reaching everywhere in the room. He began to walk around the cavern, curiosity taking over his body at the sight of numerous pods that looked like they were straight out of a gritty sci-fi movie. The closest pod to him was at least 8 feet tall and several feet around. Whatever was in it appeared to be organic, alive. He walked around it, taking in the very human-like frame. Dread crept up through his chest and gripped his throat in an icy fist. Inside the pod was a face he would never forget. It was the hero that had died. "I'll effing kill them!" Katsuki shouted as he stomped his foot on the hard stone ground, still being careful to not disturb the other graves. They lied to us. Sees Kaken. No one can know I'm here. Uncle Masaru wouldn't like the language you're using. Deku, just this once, I think he would be fine with it. They faked your death. But fine, I'll try to keep quiet. Why can't anyone know you're still alive? A lot of people would be happy. Who would be happy? I don't have any family. You, Auntie Mitsuki, and Uncle Masaru are the only ones I have left. If the HPSC find out I'm not dead, they'll take me back. I don't want to go back. I can't go back. Izuku's voice was nearing desperation as he spoke in a harsh whisper. Please, don't tell anyone. Fine. Where are you staying? Katsuki crossed his arms. Some of the tension that had been building dropped from his face. I'm staying with the group that rescued me. I don't know what to think about them. They're better than the hospital, but I don't know if I like them or not. But that doesn't matter, they're the ones that brought me back to life. At the moment, they're the only ones capable of keeping me safe. I can't tell you more about them, I'm sorry. Izuku wanted to tell his friend more, but Dr. Garaki and MST had been firm about him keeping their secret. Katsuki nodded. Promise me one thing, okay? What is it? Izuku looked up at the taller boy. Promise me you won't leave again. I promise. Izuku wasn't sure what were in the pods. As a child, he had been told stories of men defeating monsters. He had always thought that monsters and men existed separately, men were real, and monsters were only for stories. But now, he wasn't sure if that was true. His time at the hospital proved to him that men can have monster-like tendencies. The things in the pods weren't fully man, but they weren't fully monster. In a way, their grotesque nature was appealing. They existed outside of a firm dichotomy that Izuku had come to despise. My boy, you shouldn't be walking around yet. I don't want you to strain yourself, Dr. Garaki said as he reappeared in the cavern. Come now, take a seat. I want to give you another checkup before we discuss some things. Izuku made his way over to the doctor, unable to fully pull his eyes away from the creatures. Sit, the doctor said as he guided the boy onto a small cot. Now, this'll be a regular checkup. I just want to make sure that you healed properly, make sure that everything is back in order. The doctor started to go through the regular tests, taking care to write everything down for his own records. Doctor, what exactly happened? Yes. I was wondering when you would ask, he said, not faltering the slightest. Well, my boy, you died. You overdosed at the hospital and I retrieved your body. I brought you back with some work. It took time, I'll have you know. You brought me back to life? That's not possible. Dr. Garaki smiled proudly, albeit a bit arrogantly. For a normal man, yes, it is impossible. I am far from a regular person. I am able to bring people back to life. That's what those pods are used for. But those aren't humans in the pods, at least, not fully. They're my normal. I've taken simple humans and made them better. I've enhanced them to physical perfection. Comes at the cost of intelligence, but oh well. You're playing God. Am I really playing God if I'm simply a man? A human isn't able to do what a god does. I'm simply doing what the gods have allowed. The doctor sat back as he finished the physical portion of the exam. All right, I have to take some blood samples. You may feel a slight pinch. Izuku didn't flinch from the needle, he never did anymore. What do you want from me? Why would you go through the effort of bringing me back to life? The doctor filled multiple vials with the boy's blood. Well, it was part of our deal, remember? I promised to get you out in exchange for my employer getting your quirk. I wasn't going to let something as trivial as death get in the way. Izuku nodded slowly, watching his blood fill the vials. He had never been a fan of blood, but it was relieving to see his own now. His blood showed that he was alive. There we go, all done. Dr. Garaki slid the needle out and bandaged Izuku's arm. I just need to analyze these. It shouldn't take too long. While I do this, my employer wants to speak with you. Izuku wasn't given a choice as he was led from the cavern, Dr. Garaki keeping a hand on the small boy in case he started to feel faint. The hallways twisted and turned in every direction, revealing how truly expansive this structure was. He opened a door, leading the way inside. Once Izuku stepped in, he was hit by the sterile smell of a hospital. This is Izuku. Izuku, this is my employer. Izuku looked at the only other person in the room, a grotesque-looking man that was cocooned on a bed. Looks must have been deceiving, as the man looked pitiful in every regard. It's a pleasure to meet you, young Izuku. The man's voice was raspy and muffled by the oxygen mask he wore. I want to discuss our agreement. What about our agreement? I just wanted to offer you another choice. We agreed that I would get you out and, in return, I would get your quirk and you walk away. I have another option for you. You can stay with my organization. If you stay, you heal me and get to keep your quirk. Izuku frowned slightly. What do I get if I stay with you? Stability. Your quirk. A chance to grow, MSTR said slowly. Most importantly, we offer protection. The HPSC can't touch you here. If they find out you're alive, you'll go right back. Izuku tensed up, terrified of the thought of being forced back to the hospital. The hospital where he was tortured every single day, relentlessly. If you don't want to join, then I'll simply take your quirk and let you rejoin society as promised. If you do, I'll have to wipe your memory to keep you from accidentally revealing who we are. You'll take my memories? How much of my life will I remember? MSTR gave Izuku an apologetic smile. You won't remember anything. I'll give you a new identity completely complete with a new, but harmless quirk. Izuku looked down at his hands. His second chance at life had only begun, and yet he might lose everything he ever was. There was uncertainty of what the future held if he joined. He would have to heal MSTR. There was certainty of what the future held if he didn't join. He would lose his quirk, the cause of his torture, But he would also lose everything. He would become another person. Midoriya Izuku would fully and truly be dead. Do I have to decide now? I'm a generous man, I'll give you a month to decide. During that month, you're free to do as you please. No one from your past life can see you, otherwise I'll have to wipe their memories as well. Ensar coughed softly, his oxygen mask fogging up. A sooner answer is preferred, but I'll try to not rush you. Izuku nodded slowly, still uncertain. Okay, thank you. Mstr motioned for Dr. Garaki to take Izuku away. As they left, Izuku remained silent. A swirling vortex of black and purple came into existence right in front of them. Dr. Garaki confidently stepped into them, holding his hand out to Izuku. Izuku paused and stepped through. So, what are you going to choose? I don't know. Katsuki looked over at Izuku, taking his friend in fully. I want you to join them. I don't want to lose you again. You're the only real friend I've ever had. I don't want to go back to being surrounded by losers. Izuku laughed softly. Really, Kaken? It's been over a year and you still don't have any friends. None that matter, they're all stupid extras. They just hang off of me because I'm cool. They don't actually matter. Katsuki would deny it with every fiber of his being, but he was pouting a bit. Please. I think I will. I don't want to leave you again. I want to see Auntie and Uncle again. Izuku rested his head on Katsuki's shoulder. I don't know what I'll have to do if I join them. I promise I'll stick with you no matter what. Even if they make me do bad things? Katsuki scoffed softly. Yeah, even then. I have to look out for your sorry, but look what happened the last time we were apart, you effing died. A silence grew between them. Both boys had to come to terms with the concept of death far earlier than a child should have to. A child should have a carefree life, one filled with love and acceptance. Izuku had a childhood filled with pain and loss. Katsuki had an empty childhood. It was characterized by everything he didn't have and everything he lost along the way. Izuku wouldn't take the one last good thing Katsuki had away, he couldn't. I'll do it, I'll say yes. Mstr? I've made my decision. Izuku's voice was unsure as he hovered in the doorway, behind Dr. Garaki. Izuku hadn't seen the bedridden man in almost 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, it appeared that his condition had improved minimally. MSDR's breath still rattled deep within his chest, painfully so. Izuku wasn't scared of It was impossible to be scared of him because of his physical state. The only word that properly described the way Izuku felt in the man's presence was disconcerted. Ah, come in, my boy, Ember said before gently clearing his throat. Take a seat. Mstr didn't have any eyes, so he didn't know that his room didn't have any rooms. Izuku looked around before taking a seat at the foot of the bed, careful to avoid the older man's feet. Now, what have you decided, my boy? Izuku took a deep, calming breath. I'll do it. I'll join you. A smile cracked across MSDR's face, curling and expanding further than Izuku thought the man was capable of. Well, I'm happy that's what you decided, my boy. I know that part of the deal is healing you. When will I have to do that? Healing All Might was too much. Mstr grew silent as he contemplated the question. Izuku's body was filled with tension as the pause between them grew. The only sound that could be heard were the rhythmic pulses of the machines that MSTR relied on. Well, I was planning on having you heal me at the end of the month, the initial deadline for your decision. I think it's only fair to give you until that day. If my math is correct, that gives you a total of 17 days. Dr. Garaki and I will discuss the best method to deal with your pain, alright? Izuku nodded, then caught himself. Why, yes, that sounds fair. I have another question. Yes? What is it? Izuku bit his lip, drawing blood. He never felt it. Can I get pain meds? Dr. Garaki frowned. Izuku, you haven't healed anyone since All Might. Your quirk isn't active right now, your eyes are green. I know, that's just... I need them. MSTR scoffed in disgust. The DMN-HPSC got you addicted, didn't they? Incompetent BS. Yes. Dr. Garaki, please get this young man to the point where he no longer needs drags. Of course, Mr. I'll take care of this immediately. Shall we leave you? He replied simply with a nod. Right this way, Izuku. I'll see what I can do for you, Dr. Garaki said as he led the way out of the clinical room. Despite having walked the path a few times, Izuku was no closer to remembering the path to get to the doctor's lab. Once they were back in the room, Dr. Garaki patted the cot that Izuku had woken up on. Take a seat and tell me what you've been experiencing physically. Izuku sat and spoke. What happened to you in the hospital? Katsuki asked as he walked next to Izuku, the two of them on their way to an arcade. Izuku tugged lightly on the mask hiding the lower half of his face. I don't want to talk about it. Did I FNG ask whether or not you wanted to talk about it? Spill. Alright. Izuku took a deep breath to regain his composure. I healed heroes. That's all I did. I lost count after the first 2 weeks. By that time, it was already past 100. That many? What did they do about your pain? I thought Auntie didn't let you use your quirk because of the pain it put you in. Izuku's eyes were much older than the meager 10 years he had been alive for. He held back his answer as they walked past a group of teenagers who were laughing and shoving at each other. Izuku had never had that and would never have that. Izuku knew that the path fate had designated for him wasn't for the faint of heart. He wasn't sure where it led, but he was certain that his future would be filled with more pain. They didn't do anything. They just gave me N4 with pain meds and left me. They didn't like giving me anything in the beginning, but they realized I stopped putting up a fuss and fighting when I wasn't in pain. Katsuki snorted. I feel like that would be obvious. At least they gave you something for the pain. Yeah, well, I'm paying for it now. Izuku looked down at his arms that were scratched almost raw. The men that took me in won't give me anything. They said they want to help me get over my addiction. Dying had helped reset his body to some extent, but he was still going through withdrawals. Meals only lasted in his stomach for an hour if that. The only times his hands didn't shake was when he was scratching. He never noticed when he scratched, he began subconsciously and couldn't feel the sting, so there was no signal telling him to stop. His fingernails were always tainted with his own blood. Well, it's good that they're helping you. Have they said what you'll have to do? Izuku shook his head. No. I think they're really bad, but I don't think I care. Why should you care? The Hero Commission was supposed to be good, and they F'd you over. They can't be too bad if they rescued you and brought you back to life. The two boys arrived at a grimy, but well-loved arcade. They specialized in retro games, so everything there was unique. The two boys had a tradition of going on Fridays after school when they both still attended together. This was their first time back since Izuku first disappeared. They both walked in, excitement vibrating throughout their frames. I'm gonna beat your butt in Dance Dance Revolution this time. Izuku snickered. I'd like to see you try. If you do, it'll only be because I haven't been here in over a year. I'm out of practice. Yeah, well, I haven't played in a year either. Katsuki huffed as put the necessary coins into the machine. What? Why not? I wasn't going to play against some extra, not when you were always my opponent. Not when you were always the one to beat. Izuku's eyes watered up slightly. He had always been emotional like his mother. Kaken, is that your way of saying you missed me? Katsuki started to answer but was cut off by the sudden flashing lights of the game. As the music began, the two boys drowned out their surroundings and lost themselves in their childhood fun. Now, Izuku, seeing as you're joining us, I believe it's time I start your training. My training? What do you mean, sir? Izuku looked over at the still grotesque-looking man. He had healed more since Izuku last saw him, but his appearance never seemed to improve. Well, I need to teach you some basics so you can hold your own with us. I don't plan on putting you into dangerous situations, but it's still important that you know how to protect yourself. One of my associates, Jiren, was able to find someone that will be able to teach you the basics of self-defense and weapon safety. Considering Izuku wasn't allowed to do even the slightest physical activity while at the hospital for fear of hurting himself, the idea of learning self-defense was both exciting and terrifying. Before he could express his thoughts, the door to MSDR's room opened. Two men walked in. The first man to appear had gray hair and an easy, albeit sleazy smile. Despite being inside, he wore a pair of round, tinted glasses. He looked like the type of man whose loyalty wasn't dependent on morality, but rather money and favors. You're lucky, I almost wasn't able to convince this guy to come. Mr. smiled behind his mask. Thank you for your efforts, Jiren. Dr. Garaki will handle your payment. I'll give you a bonus for how quickly you pulled this off. Jiren's smile grew. Oh, it was nothing truly. He looked over his glasses at Izuku, who was still sitting at the foot of MSDR's bed. So, this is the boy? Your newest protege? Yes, this is Izuku Shigaraki. He's mine and won't be loaned out, so don't even bother asking. He threw up his hands in surrender. Hey now, I wasn't going to ask. He's a bit young, would be more trouble than he's worth. Though I may ask in the future. I'm guessing he's something special if you picked him up. The other man, who Izuku had forgotten about, cleared his throat sharply. I didn't come here to listen to you two gossips. Do you want my help or not? Izuku got a closer look at the stranger. He was wearing a mostly monochrome outfit of loose-fitting breathes, a tank top, and numerous sheaths with blades of every length and design. The only color he wore was a tattered, bright red scarf. Despite his outfit, his face was the most eye-catching thing about his appearance. Scars crisscrossed across his face, painting the skin where a nose was supposed to be. Of course, my apologies, Stendhal. I'm not Stendhal. Stendhal is dead and buried. I go by Stain now. Izuku had never met someone that was so blatantly disrespectful to a Messier before. Since joining, he had met a menagerie of different people, ranging from slightly dishonest businessmen to the most vile criminals. The one thing they all had in common was a deep-seated fear and respect for Msr. Hunter paused for a second before nodding. Of course, Stain. Despite the obvious disregard and disrespect, Mstr seemed amused. This is your new student, Izuku. Jiren, you can leave, I just have a few things to discuss with Stain. Jiren bowed his head slightly in respect and as a silent goodbye. He turned and left the room without any pomp or circumstance. Stain slowly looked over Izuku, seeming to take in every secret that the boy ever held. It felt as if he were being stalked by a predator, one that he knew there was no way to escape from. Teach him how you see fit. You can decide the schedule, I just him to be able to properly defend himself. The gym down the hall to the right is for your use if you like. If you want to take him out and train him on your own grounds, just tell Dr. Garaki. Stain grunted softly in response. We'll be outside, I'll give him back at the end of the day. Don't interrupt us. Stain turned his attention back to Izuku, jerking his head sharply. Izuku quickly scrambled up to follow the man out of the room and outside. As they walked, the taller man pulled out bandages from a pocket and proceeded to wrap his arms before tying his hair back. Izuku was led into a dingy alley, far separated from the normal hustle and bustle of the city. Brick closed in the space on either side, extending up into the sky. The alley was a dead end filled with broken bottles and trash. Scarface says he wants you to learn how to defend yourself, Stain said as he pulled out a jagged dagger. Let's see if you're worth staying alive. Quicker than a cobra, he struck. Izuku scrambled back, falling to the ground. He clutched his arm tightly. He wasn't scratched deeply at all, it was barely a nick. A single drop of blood glistened on Stain's blade. He held the knife up to his lips and slowly licked up the drop with his long tongue. Immediately, Izuku was left paralyzed. Your emissary must not know this about me, but I don't see myself as a hero nor a villain. I exist at an in-between that none will ever understand. I am the sole impartial judge in this forsaken country. Stain crouched down, still towering over the boy. Those without conviction are the biggest sinners of all. Tell me, are you a sinner? Izuku's eyes were wide with fear. He had faced death itself, and yet, it was nowhere near as terrifying as this man. I don't think I am. Stain balanced a knife against Izuku's bicep, the tip just barely scratching his skin. Tell me, why are you with MSTR? What is your goal? They said they would keep me safe. The knife dug into his skin, starting to draw blood. Izuku watched as a droplet trailed down his skin. Wrong answer. They rescued me. I have nowhere else to go. I swear, I just wanted their safety. The knife twisted in his arm. It did hurt, but it was a pain that Izuku was familiar with. Tell me the truth. I'm not scared to kill you here and now, even if you are a child. Stain seemed to notice how the boy was unflinching. You have a good pain tolerance, let's see what your limit is. I'll only stop when you tell me your truth, your inner drive. As promised, Stain continued to cut and cut and cut. Each slice caused blood to bubble over Izuku's skin, painting his skin red. The pain was constant and growing. It had been weeks since he had felt anything like this. With pain from healing, he was able to push it from his mind to a certain extent as there wasn't anything physically wrong with him. Being injured, having a blade ripped across his skin wasn't something easily ignored. Here. Izuku had stopped crying to hold back his tears. Withdrawal mixed with his own, real pain was too much. He sobbed as another cut was added to the menagerie decorating his body. Just tell me, Izuku. Izuku was ashamed. He had stated every lie that he could justify in some way, and yet, Stain was able to see through every deception. Izuku didn't want to admit the truth to himself, but he couldn't hold out any longer. Revenge. His voice was trembling. I want revenge. Stain quirked an eyebrow. Revenge? That's not very heroic of you. Revenge festers at your soul. I'm not trying to be a hero. Heroes hurt me. Hero society is built on blood and lies, but everyone is blind to that. What do you want to do about it? What do you want to do with your life? Stain pulled his knife back. It was coated with Izuku's blood, but he didn't lap at it. Instead, he wiped the blood off with a stained rag. Tell me what you want. The quiver in Izuku's voice disappeared as he finally accepted his truth. He would no longer hide himself behind facades of innocence. I want to expose hero society for what it is. I want the HPSC to repent for what they did to me, for my innocence that they stole. Stain sat back on his haunches and smirked at Izuku. That is true and pure conviction. My goal is to reveal fake heroes until only those that are pure of heart and mind remain. Our missions go hand in hand, so I will help you. He slowly stood up, sheathing his knife. Slowly, the paralysis left Izuku's body. Once he had enough control, he stood shakily. Cuts on his body bled sluggishly, but he wasn't concerned. None of the cuts were fatal, they would easily heal on their own. Lesson 1. Stain showed Izuku the basics of working with a blade. A low stance and quick feet would make him an adversary to fear. As a healer, he was always praised for his ability to save lives. Stain showed him how to end them. Izuku left the embers of his innocence in that alley, but he couldn't find it in himself to care. Amistiar? You wanted to see me? Izuku asked as he peeked through the doorway. Yes, come in, my boy. I have someone else I want you to meet. Izuku stepped into the room, seeing the one other occupant aside from Ihur. The other person was a man. No, a boy. It was a teenage boy. His exact age was hard to determine, but he seemed to be around 14 or not much of his face was visible. His features were hidden behind blue hair so light that it was almost white. Now, Izuku, this is my other protege. Izuku Shigaraki, meet Tamura Shigaraki, Mr. said was an easy smile. While he was still connected to oxygen, his lungs no longer rattled with every breath. Tamura's head snapped up as soon as the name, Izuku Shigaraki, left MSDR's lips. What's the meaning of this, Emistar? Tamura, I told you I was bringing in a protege. Just like you, he will be my son, he said as he smiled at Izuku in a what can you do kind of way. You two don't need to like each other, but I want you to at least get along. The older boy's hand slowly snaked up to his neck, scratching deep red tracks. You didn't say I would be getting a brother. You didn't ask me about this. Izuku didn't want to get closer to the agitated teen, but Emistar gestured for Izuku to take his usual seat at the foot of the bed. This put him much closer to Tamura than he was comfortable with, but he wouldn't say anything about it. Tamura, as your father and teacher, I don't need to seek your approval for every decision I make. Ihur seemed uncharacteristically patient as he explained it all to Tamura. Like I said, you don't have to like him. Just get along. He groaned like a petulant child. Fine. Whatever. Will he at least be useful? I don't want someone boring, useless joining us. He has a healing quirk. He'll be very useful to us, don't worry. MSDR's voice was even and calm as he spoke. His demeanor was enough to help Izuku relax. A healing quirk? Tamura gained a dangerous glint in his eye. A glint that MSTR couldn't see as he had no eyes. Izuku should not have relaxed. He slowly started to reach his hand out toward Izuku. Let's see how powerful it is then. Izuku felt Tamura's hand cradle the left side of his face. He was frozen in confusion as he felt every finger make contact with his face. He felt the fifth finger make contact. And then his world erupted in pain. Izuku wasn't sure if what he was experiencing was death or not. When he died, truly died, death had been a great ocean. A tossing, turning, churning ocean ruled by a thankless and forgotten god. There was no safe shore to climb onto for respite. There was no calm eye of the storm. The waves just crashed and smashed as nature dictated without any care for life, or well, death. This time, once the immediate pain of Tamura's touch passed into the back of his mind, a coldness settled about him. It started off gentle, like a cool breeze on a summer day. Then it spread. The cold seeped past his skin, into his muscles, ligaments, and tendons. The cold strangled his bones until all that was left inside of him was an impenetrable permafrost. Izuku never liked heat. Heat caused burns and burns could never be soothed. Every movement caused taut skin to rip and blisters to burst. The cold was different. Cold wasn't caused by the presence of something, it was caused by an emptiness. Where fire should exist, there was a void. Sure, ice could burn, but it wasn't the same as fire. When you first come into contact with ice, it'll feel relieving. Soon after, a sense of discomfort will settle into you, but it can be ignored. Pain comes soon after as skin and veins contract. After the pain? After the pain comes a appealing numbness. A total lack of sensation takes over the body, a numbness that can remain even after the ice is taken away. Heat only causes numbness in the hottest of fires. But cold? Cold is omnipotent. Mother Nature allows for the cold to enter any house and nothing can stop it. Sure, a fire can be created to keep it at bay, but fire can only burn so bright and so long. Waiting right outside of its apparent safety is the cold. Waiting. This cold was comforting. It enveloped him from all sides, leaving him with no sensation. He was happy. And then the lights turned on. A faint flickering out of the corner of his eye appeared and wouldn't leave. He tried to ignore it, but it only grew and grew and grew. Soon it was pounding against his eyelids, demanding his attention. The only thing he could do was open his eyes. The first thing that greeted him upon opening his eyes was Dr. Garaki shining a light into his mouth, looking around. Izuku tried to pull his head back and close his mouth, which caused the old doctor to jolt in surprise. Well, welcome back to the land of the living, Dr. Garaki said as he pulled his instruments away from Izuku's face. How are you feeling? Izuku tried to answer, but his voice caught in his throat. He frowned before just waving his hand back and forth in a OSO motion. Ah yes, some of the muscles in your face and neck were damaged when Tamura touched you. There is significant scarring, but it shouldn't hinder your ability to live normally. Dr. Garaki sat in a chair beside the bed. It'll take time for you to heal fully, but not as much time as a normal human. Izuku frowned at that. He caught the doctor's attention by waving his hand. Once Dr. Garaki was looking at him, he pantomimed writing. You want something to write with? 1 second, he stood up and disappeared from Izuku's line of view. He soon returned with a notepad and an old pen. There you go. Now, what did you want to say? You said I heal faster than a normal human. Am I not a normal human? I was wondering when you would ask about that. Dr. Garaki rubbed the back of his neck. You see, bringing someone back to life after they've truly died isn't as simple as restarting their heart. What am I if I'm not a normal human? Well, it's hard to say, my boy. We brought you back to life in a similar process to what we used to make the Nomu, but something strange happened. Normally, Tahar and I grant every Nomu a copy of a regeneration quirk that reverses cell death. They're given the quirk long enough for them to come back, but not a moment longer. Quirks act weird if you make too many copies, Dr. Garaki explained slowly. Something went wrong, or right depending on how you look at it. When MSTR tried to take the copy back, he was unable to. The quirk, despite only being in your body for a couple days at most, had already ingrained itself into your DNA perfectly. If he had taken the quirk back, he would have completely broken your genetic code. So, I'm a freak? Even by Nomu standards? No. What you are is a scientific marvel. Izuku gave him a deadpan look that one could only emit after dying but really dying twice. Dr. Garaki just shook his head. It's the truth. Anyway, I need to finish giving you a checkup, make sure all of the decay is taken care of. He set about checking Izuku's face and neck, ensuring that his regeneration quirk healed everything properly. Once he was happy with what he saw, he sat back and jotted a few notes down. Well, you're as healthy as you can be for now. I know you've only just woken up, but Tempter wishes to speak to you. Izuku nodded. Just MSTR? Or will Dusty McCrusty be there? Dr. Garaki couldn't help but laugh. He tried to school his expression into a face of disappointment, but it didn't work very well. His name is Tamura and yes, he will be there. You won't need to worry about him using his quirk on you again. But you'll see. Dr. Garaki stood and helped Izuku off of the bed. This way now. The old doctor led the way out of the lab. Izuku was almost to the point of memorizing the path between the lab and MSDR's room, but he still got lost on occasion. He couldn't help but pause once he reached the door. Dr. Garaki waltzed in without a care while Izuku remained just outside of the doorway. Come on Izuku, you won't get hurt. I promise. Against every instinct that told him to leave, he stepped inside and closed the door behind himself softly. He stayed firmly next to the doctor, far away from Tamura who was sitting on Emister's bed, pouting like a petulant child. Ah, Izuku, I'm glad to see you up and walking around. I have something that belongs to you. From underneath his blankets, Emister held out a rather impressive double-bladed dagger. A dagger that Stain had given Izuku at the end of their first lesson. Izuku gave Tamura a wide berth as he took the knife from Tamura. He looked down at it questioningly, not remembering when it fell out of his possession. He took his place next to Dr. Garaki once again. Tamura was uncharacteristically silent. His head was bowed slightly, but his red eyes were visible between the messy strands of his hair. A fierce anger rippled through his eyes, but he didn't act on it. He didn't move a single muscle. You seem confused, my boy. Please, ask your question. Izuku balanced the dagger carefully as he wrote out his question. Once it was written, he showed the page to Dr. Garaki so he could read it aloud to MSTR. Let's see here. He says, I don't remember what happened after Tamura touched my face. Why do you have my knife? MSTR smiled widely. Yes. It's unsurprising that you don't remember. Well, let me preface by saying that your lessons with Stain are paying off very well. Your reflexes are astounding. He took a short pause to clear his throat. I would also like to apologize for Tamura's behavior. He now knows that it is unacceptable to use his quirk against those that I bring in. Izuku paused to write. He doesn't look very sorry. What kind of punishment did he get for trying to kill me? Dr. Garaki read aloud for him. Well, he lost 2 fingers, Ansar said simply, as if he were talking about putting a child on timeout. But that was your work, my boy. As soon as his decay took effect, you drew your knife on instinct. Anar nudged Tamura lightly with his foot. Go on, Tamura, show him your hand. Tamura glared at Anar before uncrossing his arms, pulling his right hand out for all to see. His hand was wrapped in thick, precise bandaging. Where his pinky and ring finger should have been was nothing. Only the barest trace of a stump remained. If Izuku had cut off someone's fingers a year ago, he would have been disgusted with himself. He would have been horrified at the thought of hurting someone so badly, especially someone that obviously had a 5-point activation quirk. But now, Izuku knew that there were far worse things than losing a limb. So, yes, Izuku was disgusted to some extent, but the overwhelming feeling that he had was satisfaction. Tamura had almost killed him. Izuku could feel no remorse. He would feel no remorse for as long as he had a jagged, hand-shaped scar caressing the side of his face. Now, Tamura, I'm sure you have something to say to Izuku? If he had been angry before, he was absolutely seething now. He appeared to be a feral tomcat receiving its first bath ever personified. "I'm sorry for decaying your ugly butt face." He sounded as if every word burned him, spitting out each word with a deadly venom. Mr. tooted softly. "Is that all?" Tamura groaned loudly and hung his head back. "Mr. I just apologized to the bush-headed brat. He's the one that cut off my fingers. Only after you decayed his face." He grumbled lowly under his breath. "I'm sorry for decaying your face. Can you please heal me?" Despite everything, Izuku was enjoying the moment. There is some sick satisfaction to be had in watching someone you dislike be forced to apologize to you. His lips quirked into a small, taunting smile. Izuku took his time writing out his answer, not letting the doctor see it. He had no worries about Mr. seeing it at all, so he went all out. "No, suffer you crusty albino turd, smiley face." To emphasize his point, he drew a picture of a middle finger. Tamura was a strange mixture of angry, confused, and amused. He said no. "No? Well, it is his decision at the end of the day," Sir said. He hummed softly behind his oxygen mask. "My boy, could you at least reconsider healing him after you heal me? If my math is right, you'll be healing me in 7 days." Izuku considered for a moment before nodding. He didn't like Tamura, but it was clear to him that Mr. did. Mr. wasn't an especially affectionate man, nor was he overly kind. What he was consistent in there. He offered protection and was willing to teach Izuku what he needed to survive and thrive. For the man that had saved his life, he would consider healing Dusty McCrusty. A silence stretched between the four of them. He nodded, "Mr. Thank you, Dr. Garaki, I assumed so." The upcoming week would be interesting, that was for certain. He knew that once the week passed and Mr. was fully healed, everything would change. He wasn't sure if it was for better or for worse, but he knew that there was nothing he could do to stop the passage of time. "What the f happened to your face, Deku?" was the first thing Katsuki asked upon seeing Izuku again. It had been over a week since they had last seen each other. "Wow, Kaken, nice to see you too." Despite being fully healed, Izuku's voice was still rough and a bit raspy. It was hard to tell whether or not it would be permanent. "Seriously, nerd, what happened to you?" Katsuki asked as he carefully took Izuku's chin in his hand, tilting his face back and forth so he could see the full extent of the scarring. "It looks badass but painful. It actually doesn't hurt anymore. This is all just healed over scar tissue," Izuku said as he allowed himself to be manhandled. "It was a decay quirk." "What the hell? Who decayed your face?" "My MSTR has another protege. His name is Tamura. Mr. introduced us and he didn't take it very well. He heard I had a healing quirk and decided to test how good it was." Katsuki frowned. "But you can't heal yourself." "Exactly. The fucker decayed my face. Apparently, I cut off 2 of his fingers before passing out." Fine, whatever. Let's just get to hanging out, alright?" Katsuki grabbed Izuku's wrist and began to pull him towards the mall. "Put your mask on. Too many people around to go flaunting around." Izuku nodded and pulled a medical mask on over his nose. He pulled the hood of his hoodie up to hide his hair. Izuku almost always let Katsuki decide what they would do when they hung out. Izuku wasn't very in touch with normal society. He mostly remained among the alleyways where the pettiest of criminals to the most despicable of killers lurked. The criminal underworld was his home and had been for many weeks now. Before that, he had been locked away in a hospital with no outside connection. "What exactly are we getting from the mall?" "I need new shoes. Some dumb extra from school ruined mine with their slimy but quirk." "Did you bring money?" Katsuki asked as he looked over at his friend. Izuku nodded before pulling a simple wallet out of his hoodie pocket. "Mr. gave me 28,000 yen to buy anything I need or want." Katsuki's eyes widened. "The hell he give you that much for?" Izuku shrugged. "He likes me? Might also feel guilty about the whole decaying face thing. I don't know, I don't question it. You're buying our lunch." Izuku snorted. "Okay, I was already planning on it." The two boys worked their way through the mall, but they never lingered in a single store for too long as neither had the patience for it. Katsuki quickly found a new pair of shoes that looked like almost perfect replicas of the ones that had been ruined. Izuku bought small things as he went along, the most expensive being a fashionable and sturdy pair of black leather gloves. Izuku had recently taken to wearing gloves. It wasn't something he ever really thought of before. Even when he was in the hospital, the doctors never let him wear gloves. If a patient arrived on the brink of death, he couldn't take the time to pull his gloves off. The one that recommended it was Stain. If you heal your opponent on accident, then you'll put yourself at a disadvantage. Sure, you have a high pain tolerance, but you're bringing them back to their peak. Cover the F up and you'll be fine, Stain had said towards the end of one of their lessons. He was right. Every time they spared, all of the traction that Izuku made against the larger man was erased as soon as their skin brushed together. It doesn't look too good, but who the hell cares in a fight? Stain wrapped bandages around Izuku's arms. They spanned from the tips of his fingers to his shoulders. These are layered, so even if an opponent manages to cut one open, there will hopefully be another layer intact. He tore the bandages and tucked the ends in to keep them secure. Why can't I just wear long sleeves? What happens when some fuckhead rips your sleeves in a fight? What happens when someone grabs your wrist and the sleeve is pushed up? Cotton is cut pretty easily. You need a skin-tight barrier. Multiple layers. Izuku didn't beat Stain that day, but he didn't heal any more of his injuries. You're supposed to heal Star this week, right? Katsuki asked over lunch. They had both left the mall to eat at a small ramen shop nearby. Izuku nodded, pausing to slurp his noodles. Yeah, he said as he wiped his mouth. I'm supposed to heal him tomorrow. Katsuki looked down at his bowl in contemplation. What are you going to do about the pain? You said he looks about as bad as All Might did. Dr. Garaki said he came up with a solution. He said he's trying to find a more permanent solution for the future. I trust him, he hasn't lied to me yet. But if those fuckers hurt you, I'll kill them, Katsuki said with all of the conviction his 10-year-old body could handle. Kaken, Izuku said as he laughed softly. Mr. is a centuries-old criminal mastermind. I think he can handle a scrawny 10-year-old. Scrawny? Who the heck are you calling scrawny, Deku? Katsuki pulled Izuku into a headlock. You're the scrawny one, broccoli head. If they hurt you, I'll kill them and then I'll kill you. Izuku laughed harder. I feel like that's counterproductive, Izuku said as he tried to tug his head out of Katsuki's grip. Izuku eventually just tapped out, resigning himself to his fate. Your butt is counterproductive. The rest of the afternoon was filled with childish jokes and carefree laughter. That being said, it was one of the best days that Izuku could remember. He never said it to Katsuki, but he was scared of what would happen during the healing. All he could do was take refuge in his friend's presence and try to ignore the inevitable. Today's the day, Izuku, Dr. Garaki woke him up with an excited smile. Come on my boy, let's get this over with. Izuku rubbed his eyes as he slowly sat up. His room didn't have any windows, so there was no natural light to be seen. He couldn't see the sun or the sky or any part of the outside world. Can I have breakfast first? Dr. Garaki gave him an apologetic smile. I'm afraid not, my boy. To keep you from experiencing the pain, I'll be putting you into a medically induced coma. Eating something beforehand could lead to complications. Izuku nodded before standing up. Once on his feet, he slowly stretched the stiffness out of his body. Let's get this over with then. Dr. Garaki had a verifiable skip to his step as he led the way to MSDR's bedroom. There was an addition to the room, a second bed, this one with a menagerie of medical equipment surrounding it. Tamura was sulking in the corner, glaring at Izuku as he walked in. Izuku responded to his glare by sticking out his tongue. Dr. Garaki had Izuku take a seat in the empty bed. He quickly set about connecting all of the necessary equipment. Izuku tuned out everything as the doctor worked. There was nothing new about this. The old doctor pulled Izuku out of his thoughts by waving his hand in front of his eyes. My boy, we're ready. I already have the necessary medications in the 4 attached to your arm. You should begin to feel tired soon. This button right here, he pointed to a button attached to one of the various machines, will induce your coma. The second Himsar is done healing, I will push this, and you will enter your coma. You will be kept in this room and monitored constantly. After the necessary 4 days, I will pull you out. Do you understand? Izuku nodded slowly. The heart monitor he was attached to displayed his elevated heart rate. Let's get this over with. With Dr. Garaki's nod of approval, Izuku reached out towards MSTR. With a smile, MSTR connected their hands. Pain. Nothing. Come on, my boy, open your eyes. Waking up was like trying to run up wind in a monsoon. His body just wanted to give in, to let himself continue his rest. Something in the back of his mind screamed at him to wake. Waking up was very important. There you go, just like that. Let me see your eyes. Izuku groaned softly, his face twisting in slight irritation as he finally woke from his coma. Funnily enough, it was more restful than when he died. He slowly peeled his eyes open, fuzzy shapes of light slowly came into focus. A man with white hair, intense back eyes, and a strong jaw was leaning over the side of his bed. He was smiling broadly and brightened once Izuku opened his eyes. Hello there, Izuku, welcome back. Izuku had no idea who he was. Izuku slowly backed away, limbs still heavy from the medications and sleep. Who are you? The man chuckled deeply and took a seat. My boy, it's me. Izuku almost couldn't believe it. He knew that his quirk was powerful, but the amount that MSTR's body had changed was astounding. All of the scar tissue was gone, his eyes had grown back, all of his features were unmarred and prominent. Even though many of his injuries had technically healed, they were all gone. Wow, you look different. That I do, I haven't looked this good in decades, Amr said as he leaned back in his chair. Izuku had never seen him smile so genuinely. You're amazing, Izuku. Not only did you heal me, but you've made my body feel like it did when I was 30. Izuku was learning more and more about his quirk the longer he stayed with Deku. The HPSC had never questioned his limitations or the exact function of his quirk, they had simply used the tool they were given. Why question a gift? Dr. Garaki was one of the most inquisitive people Izuku had ever met. Checkups were filled with tests and scans and questions. Every part of his anatomy was studied with the utmost care to figure out exactly what made him tick. For example, Izuku's quirk made the number of stem cells in someone skyrocket despite only brief contact. It wasn't the only mechanism for his healing, but it was an interesting aspect. Dr. Garaki swore he would figure everything out about his quirk if it was the last thing he did. Izuku didn't doubt him. Thank you for healing me, my boy. Nothing I can do will ever show my gratitude properly. Izuku nodded. Just fulfilling my promise. He bit the inside of his cheek, contemplating his next question. What exactly is going to happen with me now? Amr pet his head to the side, seemingly in confusion. What's going to happen to you? Did you think we would only keep you around to heal me? Izuku didn't answer, but that was enough for MSTR to know. Izuku-no. When I introduced you to Tamura, I called you Izuku Shigaraki. That makes you more than my protege, it also makes you my son. Her gently ruffled Izuku's hair. Izuku was left wordless. He had no idea how to respond to the man that had been the reason for his continued life. His existence with this man was confusing to say the least. He was brought back for the use of his quirk, but the man seemed to actually care about him? The HPSC only kept him healthy so he could continue to heal and help others. But MSTR? MSTR gave him the choice. Heal MSTR and keep his work. Give up his quirk and live a normal life. It was his choice to not heal Tamura. Tamura still wasn't healed, he was still missing his fingers. He wasn't used to choices. He wasn't used to being seen as a quirk, not a tool. I know you had a family that loved you, but I want you to join my family. We will do everything we can to help you reach your goals if you help us reach ours. Izuku, will you stay? Given the choice, Izuku had to say yes. What has he done? Izuku wasn't sure how he felt. He had always been told that saving lives was his purpose. He had always been told that death was never the answer, but the HPSC had already been proven to be liars. Abuse and murder mostly. He dabbles in fraud. Charges never stick because he's big money. Stain stood up from the ledge. Since justice can't find him, we'll bring it to him. He led his student away from the edge and down the side of the building. They wove their way through the shadows to a nicer part of town. It was a part of town that Izuku could never hope to live in. It was for old money and the powerful. He was neither. They eventually came upon a bar that was a tad dingy for the area. It was the kind of bar that looked away when something happened, so it was perfect for the wealthy without morals. "Wait right here," Stain said as he left Izuku in the alley next to the bar. Izuku fiddled with his hands as he waited for his teacher to return. He returned a few minutes later with a squirming and fighting man. "Meet Hajime Zankaku, a waste of space and oxygen." Zankaku was roughly shoved to the ground. Before he could try and push himself up, Stain sliced his arm with his sword. He pulled the blade up to his lips and slowly licked up the metallic blood. Zankaku froze. "What the hell did you do to me? Who are you?" Zankaku's neck strained as he tried and failed to move. Stain smirked, his teeth bloody. "I'm Hero Killer, Stain. Despite the name, I kill more than just heroes. I also kill disgusting beasts such as yourself." He rested the tip of his sword under Zankaku's chin. "My student will be the one dealing with you tonight." Izuku froze. He knew that someone would be dying tonight, but he didn't think he would be doing the killing. He had come to terms with death a long time ago, but being the hand behind it was different. "Okay." Izuku took the knife that Stain held out to him. "You're making a kid kill me?" Izuku was glad that Zankaku wasn't able to see his face behind the mask. Stain didn't bother answering. "You have about 5 minutes until my quirk wears off. Use your time well." He stepped back and leaned against the wall. He clearly had faith in Izuku to do what was necessary. Izuku glanced back at his mentor before stepping forward with his knife. It felt awkward and cold in his hands despite handling it for hours on end. He could do this, surely he could do this. The man laying before him was despicable. He had hurt so many people. This man hurt people how the HPSC hurt Izuku. He needed to be stopped. Izuku pressed the knife against Zankaku's neck and froze. His body was suddenly filled with ice that crept into his bones and weighed down every movement he made. Stain had used his quirk on him several times. It wasn't dissimilar to this. Zankaku could sense his hesitation. "Hey kid, you don't want to kill me, do you? You can never go back from killing someone. Do yourself a favor and run away. I won't even tell the police what you almost did." A bead of sweat ran down his face. Izuku pressed the tip of the knife in enough to draw a thin trickle of blood. "Shut up." He could do this. He could kill this monster. Killing was easy. Izuku knew human anatomy intimately from his stay in the hospital. He knew exactly where each organ, vein, and bone lay. Healing so many heroes meant that he felt pain from each part of the body at least once. Punctured lungs, compound femur fractures, lacerated liver. Each injury allowed him to create a map from his pain. To kill Zankaku, all he would need to do is slide the knife in, just off-center. Cutting the carotid artery and jugular vein would be so simple. So simple, and yet he couldn't do it. The only blood that he spilled from the man was an insignificant trickle. Izuku knew it would only sting at best. He was more likely to die from infection than blood loss. "Can't do it? Not surprised, you seem like a kid with morals. Run along and take your crazy teacher with you. I won't even come after you." The relief on Zankaku's face was clear. His finger began to twitch. Stain's quirk was wearing off. Izuku didn't believe the man for a second. There was only one truth about all humans, and that was they all lie. This man was easily twice Izuku's size. If they fought, there would be no match. Zankaku wasn't just a random citizen, he was a murderer. He didn't get onto Stain's list for nothing. His life depended on being able to kill this man. He just had to plunge the knife in. It was so simple, and yet, he couldn't do it. Zankaku kicked his legs out towards Izuku. Caught off guard, Izuku fell to the ground hard. He was winded and could only watch as Zankaku slowly rose to his feet. "Shoulda run when I gave you the chance, kid." He picked up the knife that Izuku had dropped, the one that had been balanced at his neck. "Pretty nice knife. I usually don't kill kids, but you gotta do what you gotta do." Zankaku raised his arm, but never brought it down. Stain's sword cut through his neck from behind. A spray of blood covered Izuku as the decapitated head fell and rolled to the side. You're lucky I decided to come back and check on you. I should have let him kill you, teach you a real lesson. And his doc could easily bring you back. Stain looked down at his masked student. What do you have to say for yourself? Izuku didn't say anything. He scrambled to his feet, tripping over himself. Without a second glance, he took off running into the night. Despite the time of night, there were plenty of people out on the street, likely because it was a nicer neighborhood. There was no need to worry about criminals, as the best heroes made their presence well known in the area. Izuku didn't look at faces as he ran. If he did, he would have seen faces filled with horror at the blood dripping off of him. He crashed into people, into couples, but he wasn't conscious enough to care. He darted into a dark alley, the first he had seen for blocks. Once he thought he was safe in the shadows, he ripped off his mask and emptied the contents of his stomach. He retched and gagged violently, hurting his throat as he was unable to stop himself. Izuku staggered to his feet, leaning heavily on the wall. He slowly made his way further down the alley, towards the other opening. His head was down as he walked. He didn't even notice the shadow appear in front of him. The ground met Izuku as he lost his footing once more. This time, he didn't try to get up. Izuku! A confused and awed voice asked from in front of him. Izuku Midoriya? Is that you? Izuku looked up and saw something from his nightmares. It was a nurse wearing slightly stained scrubs, clearly having just finished a shift at the hospital. At the HPSC hospital. This very nurse had hooked up his for morphine countless times. She had given him a book on his birthday. Izuku's voice was rough from the acid of his stomach. I don't know who you're talking about. I'm not Izuku. He wanted to pull his mask back on, but it was still soaked in blood and gore. It is you. The nurse's face brightened. I can't believe you're alive. How did you survive? She fumbled through her purse, clearly searching for something. I have no idea who Izuku Midoriya is, leave me alone. Izuku quickly stood up and tried to walk out of the alley. Before he could go more than a few steps, the nurse grabbed his wrist. Let me go. No, I can't let you disappear. Do you know how long we mourned you? You were our best worker. She pulled a cell phone out of her purse. I'm taking you back. We can go back to how things were before. You won't have to live on the streets anymore. Go back. Go back. No. A feral scream ripped out of Izuku's throat as he fought against her grip. I refuse to go back. You can't take me, I won't let you. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, only struggling slightly. Despite Izuku having more training, she was still an adult that dealt with unruly patients regularly. She dialed a number as she held him tight. Stop fighting, Izuku. This is for your own good. She pinned him against the wall and put the phone on speaker. Dr. Tanaka? I've found Izu. Stain always said to keep a knife on hand. Izuku stared at the bloody gash on the nurse's neck in horror. His hand shook as he held up the knife once again. Her hands scrabbled at her neck, trying to stop the bleeding. All she managed to do was spread the blood further. Her eyes were wide in fear and pain. Izuku pushed her to the ground, held the knife above her. I'm sorry, he knew she wouldn't survive the cut. She would drown in her own blood or bleed out. Neither would be quick. I'm sorry. He brought the knife down clumsily towards her chest. Please let her die quickly. I don't want her to suffer. I didn't want to kill her, but I can't go back. I can never go back. Nothing will make me go back. There was no scream of pain. There was no gasp of shock. There was only a faint gurgle. After the seventh stab, the nurse's body went limp. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused. She was dead. Izuku threw the knife across the alley and pushed himself away from her body. He hugged his knees to his chest and hid his face in hopes of blocking out her image. It wasn't long before he started to sob. Izuku didn't notice when Stain entered the alley. He didn't notice when crushed cell phone under his boot, severing the call. He didn't notice when he pulled the wallet from the nurse's scattered purse. Congratulations, Izuku. Stain squatted down next to his student. You're a murderer. Izuku, Dr. Garaki looked up from his clipboard during his most recent checkup. There's one last test I want to run today. Izuku was more than happy to perform his tests. Every test revealed some new depth to his quirk, something interesting. Besides, the tests didn't hurt any more than healing someone, healing normal injuries, nothing like all might or empty. His curiosity far outweighed his dislike for the discomfort. Of course, what is it? Dr. Garaki smiled at the small boy sitting on the exam table. I want you to try and heal someone. I assume there's something special about their injury? He nodded. You would be correct. He was our first attempt at a sentient Nomu. He was a success, but he wasn't exactly stable. Because of his instability, we had to lock away many of his higher function. I think that your quirk will be able to properly fix the glitches. Izuku nodded. All right, it doesn't hurt to try? Kurogyri? The doctor asked and turned to a door Izuku had never used before. A man made almost purely of a purple and black mist appeared. The only discernible feature were two yellow glowing eyes. He remained silent as he walked over. This is Kurogyri, formerly known as Oboro Shirakumo. Hopefully, you'll be able to integrate all of his different parts properly. Izuku stood from the examination table at the doctor's prompting. Kurogyri took a seat, still silent. Izuku slowly pulled his glove off of his hand and glanced between the Nomu and the doctor. Go on. What if he just reverts back to who he was before? Then we'll know that you can revert Nomus back, but I don't think that'll happen. Just give it a try. Izuku nodded and slowly reached out. He touched where he believed Kurogyri's cheek to be. It was strange. There was no pain that rushed into his body, as there was no true injury to heal. Kurogyri wasn't broken, he was just a puzzle that wasn't put together correctly. Izuku and the doctor watched as Kurogyri was rearranged, put back together correctly. His features began to stabilize. No longer was his head a shapeless and shifting cloud, it was now solid skin and bone. His eyes were still a sharp glowing yellow, but they were no longer streaks, they had true shape with irises and pupils. His hair was most reminiscent of the purple haze he had originally been. His hair seemed to shift between defined strands and purple clouds, seemingly at random. His face twisted into a naturally mischievous grin. Hey Doc. Dr. Garaki smiled broadly. Welcome, Oboro Kurogyri. It's been 4 FNG years. I want answers. The HPSC president slammed a large case file down onto the meeting room table. She stood up abruptly and stalked around the table, looking at everyone sitting before her. It has been 4 years and I have yet to see any solid lead as to where Izuku Midoriya is. I'm sorry ma'am, it's just, he doesn't have a solid trail. A solid trail? He's supposed to be dead. I don't care what you have to do. Find him. Before he kills any more of our agents. She opened the file and spread out an array of pictures for everyone to see. Corpses. This is what will continue to happen if we don't bring him in. In the past 4 years he has killed 21 of our own. Silence. We'll double our efforts. Would it help to bring attention to the public? And tell them what? That a child died, was brought back to life, and is now targeting the very commission that oversees their protectors? I think not. We'll keep this quiet and to ourselves. Am I understood? Yes, ma'am. We'll give you any updates that we find. Good. You're all dismissed. Katsuki stalked forward, taking in all of the other hopeful students surrounding him. He wasn't worried in the slightest, not at all. He already knew that he had aced the written exam, he had been the top of his class and Izuku made sure to quiz him on anything and everything that could possibly show up on the exam. It was now time for the practical, and he still wasn't nervous at all. His best friend was a villain. He knew how to hold his own in a fight. Besides, he would be fighting against robots. All it took was a quick and fairly weak blast, and they would be indisposed. As soon as the signal was given, he took off like an untethered bull. He sped himself up with small blasts aimed behind him. Despite what many would assume, he did take care to make sure that he didn't hit anyone that was behind him. He wanted to be a hero for heaven's sake. Of course he wouldn't purposely hurt someone that didn't deserve it. He didn't have to look behind him to know that he was pulling ahead. Before the first person could enter the area, he had already taken out 3 robots. He didn't pay attention to their points, there was no need. If there was one thing he was good at, it was causing destruction. "Hey, that was my robot," an annoyed voice called out. He turned to them and smirked. "Should have been faster then." Without a second glance, he blasted off and decapitated a robot on his way. If Izuku had been here for the practical, he would have had a blast. Sure, he may not have a physical quirk that could help him, but he was a killer and overeager person with a dream. He would have spent his time split between carving the robots up with his knives and muttering about how they functioned. Each wire he cut would have been accompanied by a comment on how their build was faulty. Katsuki knew Izuku well. Knowing him well meant that he knew how important it was that he attend Yue. Not just for his own future, but for Izuku's hopes for revenge. He took a deep breath in, held it, and released. Out of plumes of dust and smoke, a humongous robot arose. If it stepped incorrectly, even once, it could have killed 5 people. Easily. Despite the size difference, Katsuki still wasn't scared. He wasn't scared in the slightest. His eyes showed him a robot that could easily kill him, but he knew that it wasn't designed to kill. There would be programming in it that would fall short of his death. He was in no true danger. At least, no danger that Recovery Girl wouldn't be able to fix. His eyes showed him danger, but his head knew that it was nothing. He knew he should just run. He would get nothing out of destroying the thing. At least, he wouldn't get any points. Katsuki was about to turn away before he saw her. A girl was partially buried underneath the rubble, directly in the path of the 0-pointer. The robot wasn't designed to kill, but she was already badly hurt and buried. Who's to say her death wasn't possible? Katsuki knew that she was too far away to help in a conventional way. He wouldn't be able to get her out of the rubble and out of the way fast enough. His only option was to take it down. Katsuki took a deep breath in, held it, and released. He focused his gaze on every weak point in the robot. They weren't very hard to find, all they were was joints and exposed wires. Rushing up on the robot when it was in the middle of taking a step unbalanced it easily. A few well-aimed, powerful blasts were enough to make the joints creak and crumble. He didn't take time to revel in his success. Just as fast as he had approached, he blasted away to get out of the way of falling debris. The carcass of the once imposing robot looked far less scary after its death. He used the edge of his shirt to wipe the dirt and sweat from his face. When he looked over, he saw the girl floating the debris off of herself. Why she didn't do that in the beginning, he couldn't be sure, but all that mattered was that she wasn't dead. There was no question he was getting into Yue. "I swear to the god Tomu, if you don't stop planting the wheat in my pumpkin patch, I will cut off your fingers again," Izuku said in annoyance as he steered his character to his hoe on the ground. "I'm trying to get us a giant pumpkin and I can't do that if you keep messing up my layout." Tamura snickered and proceeded to plant wheat everywhere Izuku had just used the hoe. "Stop hoeing where I want to plant my wheat then. Why are you even on the farm? You always just F off in the mines to fight slimes and monsters." "I do what I want, I don't let past actions define me." "So, your entire personality isn't just, I accidentally killed my entire family and I'm now edgy?" Izuku leaned away from Tamura, out of his reach. He rolled his eyes audibly. "You're a effing brat, you know that? And you're one to talk Mr. Orphan Nurse Broccoli. Calling me broccoli stopped being funny after the first 9 times. Not 10 times. No, I refuse to admit that you've been funny enough times to count into the double digits." Tamura grunted softly as he planted his last wheat seed. He steered his character towards a storage bin and began to sort through the seeds. "I don't see how you can just stay on the farm the whole time and not get bored." "I don't just stay on the farm, I also fish. I also like to F with Pierre by only gifting him tortillas." "Why tortillas?" "He hates tortillas." Tamura snorted softly. "He deserves it." Just as he did with the wheat, he began to haphazardly plant the grapes. This was a bit more annoying, as grapes lasted for multiple harvests and wouldn't allow you to walk through them. "Yeah, I'm done with this. I'm gonna go kill some lava crabs." "You're a FING menace. I hope you pass out in the mines and get robbed." If one were to tell Izuku or Tamura that they would have a joint farm on Stardew Valley when they had first met, they would have laughed in your face before. Well, Izuku would have laughed and Tamura would have attempted to decay your face. In Izuku's experience, it wasn't fun at all. Against what most would expect, their relationship improved after Izuku died, and after Izuku cut off Tamura's fingers. Tamura is used to getting what he wants when he wants. He doesn't like you right now because you don't do as he says. He needs to learn that he can't always get what he wants. Once he learns, he'll warm up to you, I had said one day. Just give it some time. Will I have to heal him even if he doesn't like me? Izar shook his head. Only heal him when he directly asks you to. He thinks I'll force you to. He needs to right this wrong with you. I want you two to be brothers, not nemesis. It was rather strange. Izuku couldn't pinpoint where they moved from nemesis to I don't hate you, but I don't like you, from awkward acquaintance to I still don't like you, but I would kill for you. Neither liked the other, but they were definitely closer to a brotherly relationship than they had been in the beginning. Video games helped. Izuku hadn't ever touched a single video game. Tamura had been absolutely appalled and set aside all of his feelings of hatred and distrust to show the younger boy everything he had been missing. They never worked together well in the games, but that was the fun. Tamura messed up Izuku's farm layout in Stardew Valley, and Izuku refused to heal Tamura in every battle game. Why the F didn't you heal me? You were right there and you let me die. I'm a healer in real life, I didn't want to be a healer in the game. You pushed me to be effing Mercy and I don't want to be Mercy. Izuku sneered a bit as he replied. If I'm gonna be Mercy, I'll be the worst Mercy ever. Tenji with each other was how they showed their begrudging affection. Tamura pumped his fist in excitement after he defeated a rather difficult lava crab. Do know what Doc wants with you later? Izuku shrugged vaguely. Something with quirks probably? Him and Azar, and intrigued by how the Regan quirk incorporated itself into my DNA. I think they've been trying to replicate it, don't know if it'll work. Your quirk is seriously effed up. Whatever you say, Duke Dusterfucker. I really hate you. I know, the feeling is mutual. A light flashed, accompanied by the faint click of a camera. It was dark out and everything in the alley was bathed in shadow. It was nearly impossible to see anything without the use of a flashlight. It was merciful that they couldn't see. Another one? The agent nodded solemnly before packing his camera away. That makes it 22. Is there any hint as to what his motive is? Why would a kid start killing the people that helped him? The body was loaded up into an unmarked van. All of the evidence from the crime scene was packed up before the blood was washed away. There would be no sign that anything ever happened. Hell if I know. He's supposed to be dead. My best guess? It's not really him. Someone's just using his identity to mess with us. Play with our heads. He ran his fingers through his hair. The only thing we have linking him to these kills is that phone call. The doctor recognized his voice, clear as day. Well, there's nothing we can really do until we find him, is there? He shook his head tiredly. No. Just look for evidence and hints and hope that he doesn't come after you next. How do you think you did? Izuku asked as he sipped his tea. He was at his normal, weekly hangout with Katsuki. They were in the back corner of their favorite cafe, hidden enough where Izuku wasn't scared of his face being seen, not that there were many people alive that could recognize him. But as always, better safe than sorry. Katsuki scoffed. Is that even a question? I took FING first. Izuku smiled in a teasing, condescending way. Now Katsuki. You won't know that you passed until you get your letter. Izuku watched as his eye twitched. Don't call me that, you motherfucker. I thought you didn't like the nickname, Kaken? Izuku pet his head to the side. Messing with Katsuki was one of his favorite pastimes, directly after messing with Tamura. I don't like it, but it's better than being called Katsuki. Only the old hag calls me that. Katsuki took an angry sip of coffee. Izuku wasn't sure how he was able to sip his coffee angrily, but he did. It truly was a marvel of modern society. Just call me that baby butt nickname. Okay, Kaken. Izuku smiled saccharinely sweet. But really, how did the exam go? He considered the question for a few seconds before shrugging. It went fine? It wasn't that hard. I knew everything on the written portion except for 2 questions related to pre-Quirk history. The practical was a fing joke. I easily got enough points to pass within the first 2 minutes. Everyone else, there was a complete joke. Izuku nodded at his friend's answer. He was quite used to his antics and way of speech, so he was able to easily decipher what exactly had happened. Was there anyone there interesting? Not really. There was this one kid with red hair and shark teeth. He seemed pretty alright. We didn't really talk at all though. Makes sense, you were both trying to focus. Katsuki grunted in agreement. With one final sip, he finished off his coffee. What have you been up to? Stain still running you ragged? Yeah, but that's nothing new. He's a hard butt and an a-hole. He looked down into his almost empty cup. Swirled the tea around as he continued. He's been letting up a bit recently. Says I have enough skills to purge society of all of the unrighteous scum without his help. That's his way of saying I'm ready to leave the nest and go off on my own, I think. Thank God, that guy's insane. No more insane than I am, honestly. Izuku finished off his tea, making a face at the bitter leaves that ended up in his mouth. Okay, but like, you're man-made crazy, he's homegrown crazy. That makes absolutely no sense. Yes, it does. He's crazy because of the sheet that he did. You're crazy because of things others did to you, Katsuki said in a harsh whisper. There's a difference. The difference is that he'll get a normal straitjacket while the insane asylum might let me customize mine. I'm thinking of natural colors. I hear they're calming. That, or sequins so I can blind the doctors and guards. Katsuki dropped his head onto the table loudly. You're effing impossible. I know, darling. I try. Izuku grinned mischievously. Katsuki couldn't tell if it was his, I want to TP the police chief's house, grin or his, I want to set a bank on fire, grin. It was very hard to tell as they were very similar. You know how people used to read tea leaves to tell fortunes? What do you think my tea leaves say? Izuku asked as he flipped his cup around for Katsuki to see. Katsuki gave him an exasperated look before taking the cup. He looked at the contents for a few seconds before thinking of his answer. They'd say that you need to stop bothering me, otherwise you'll die for a third time. I've already died 3 times. What? When the hell did you die again? Well, the first time was at the hospital. The second time was Tomu. Third time was with Stain. Fourth time was with Stain. Fifth time was with Stain. Sixth time was... Let me guess. Sixth time was with Stain. Yeah. Izuku said brightly. How'd you guess? Katsuki sighed loudly and shook his head. You're effing impossible. But you knew of me. Katsuki stared Izuku down for several seconds, not blinking. He took in the sight of his grinning, but scarred friend. Life hadn't been easy for either of them, but especially for Izuku. He never thought he'd care for someone so much. Katsuki loved his parents, sure. Would he kill for them? Probably. But would he risk his future for them? Most likely not. Would he risk his future for Izuku? For the slim chance that the boy could get revenge and have some semblance of stability and safety? You wish. Yes, without question. The day smelled strongly of decay. It wasn't the crisp smell of autumn, of leaves dying so winter could be welcomed. It wasn't the smell of plants withering away to create nutrients for spring to use. No, it smelled purely of decay. Rotting garbage, of which some might have once been flesh. It was a pungent aroma that refused to leave Izuku's nose no matter how hard he tried. He might have had freedom as a villain, but that freedom came with being confined to the shadows. Gross. Izuku made a face as he wiped his bloody knife off on his victim. The sight of gore had long since stopped disgusting him. After all, it was a part of life. After sheathing his knife, he stood and brushed his knees off. He looked up at the sky and was met by the smog-smudged moon. He made a face as the euphoria of ending a life faded. The scent of his back-alley oasis crept back. Double gross. If he hadn't already been wearing a mask, he would have pinched his nose. Izuku was starting to understand why Stain was tentative to have Izuku heal him. If he was healed, then he would be forced to smell the disgusting alleys that he spent most of his time in. He wasn't one to be surprised often, at least, not by the arrival of someone. Stain had drilled it into him to always be aware. The one person he still was unable to track, despite how hard he tried, was Oboro Kurogiri. A warping quirk will do that, even the most attentive people can't hope to predict that. Oboro peeked his head through one of his misty portals. Come on, sir wants to talk to you. Izuku jumped at the Oboro's sudden appearance. I'm gonna get you a bell. He grinned, a bit cheekily. That would only do so much, I would still appear at random. Ever since Oboro's stabilization, his relationship with Izuku grew. His previous existence as the Nomu Kurogiri hadn't allowed for him to truly think, to truly connect. There had been small wisps of his past and personality, but nothing as loud or powerful as the boy from before his death. Oboro wasn't sure how long it had been since his death, but he was sure that his physical age didn't transfer over. That being said, he looked to be in his lower 20s. He had wanted to be a hero in his past life, but that dream had long since disappeared. It had been crushed just like how he had been. But that was the past, far too painful to dwell on. All he could do was move forward and help those that gave him a second chance. Anyway, come on kid, Oboro said as he held out a hand. Also, you might want to shower before meeting with MSTR. Izuku took his hand. Yeah, I will, Mum. Together, they stepped through the cloudy portal. It was only Katsuki's first day in class, but he was already close to killing his classmate. Which was a new record for him. It usually took the extras a few days to get on his nerves enough. Glasses, Tenya Ida, was a certifiable pain in the butt. The kid came from old money, that much was clear with how out of touch he was with modern society. Izuku would have had fun messing with him. Shut the F up Glasses, I don't care. Quit wasting your breath, Katsuki sneered. A few of the others already in the classroom giggled behind their hands. Ida whipped around to find who was laughing but came up empty-handed. Such vulgar language is not allowed in these hallowed halls. You need to fix yourself before I report you to our teacher. The door crashed against the frame as it was slid open. Please don't. I don't care if you swear in class, just don't talk about anything illegal. The man walking in looked as if death had warmed over. Multiple times. And then refrozen over. Multiple times. Take your seats and shut up. Everyone scrambled to take their seats. Everyone could only assume that this rugged man was their homeroom teacher even though he looked like he belonged to the streets. I'm Shoyuta Aizawa, also known as the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead. With me, you will learn everything it takes to become a hero and survive in this society. If you even trip, I will not hesitate to expel you, am I understood? All things considered, Katsuki was a bit disappointed by the others in his class. Their desires to be heroes were shallow and seemed to be clouded by the beauty of stardom. They didn't know the darker sides, either because they were ignorant or they ignored anything that would sully the perfect picture they had painted. It was clear that their teacher, Mr. Aizawa, was well versed in the dark and gritty side of heroics as he was an underground hero. Someone doesn't get eyes as dead as his without seeing the horrors of humanity. But someone like Ida? He simply wanted to be a hero to fulfill his family legacy. Sure, there may have been a secondary longing to make the world a better place, but he was far too straight-laced to make any real changes. He wasn't willing to get his hands dirty to get the necessary change. But Katsuki? Katsuki's hands were stained since the moment he found his dead friend standing over his own grave. All Katsuki could do was wonder how long his classmates would long. It would definitely be interesting to see if there were any expulsions as Mr. Aizawa had mentioned. It would definitely make the extras consider their place here at UA. The rest of the day passed in an indistinct blur, filled with fitness testing and whining classmates. Naturally, he placed first. It wasn't anything surprising to him, but Ida seemed rather riled up at the fact that such a vulgar and disrespectful person is the top of the class. He tried to keep his mind open to the others. He had to. MSTR had revealed to him after he was accepted into UA that there was another spy in the school. He wasn't given a name, age, or class track. Think of it as a challenge, my dear Katsuki. If you're able to find them, you'll be able to hold it over Izuku's head. Even he doesn't know who it is. All he hoped was that it wasn't that stupid grape fucker, the one that was obsessed with impressing girls. Or Glasses. If it was either of them, Katsuki might have to rethink the whole being a spy for a villain thing. And normally, he wasn't a big person for socializing, but finding the other spy or even managing to turn a few other students could be helpful. But that was a worry for tomorrow. For today he would only worry about getting used to this new school. A small body was thrown back effortlessly. It skidded across the rough ground before coming to rest near a brick wall. "Really, Izuku, I had hoped for better," said from across the alley. "You've been training with Stain for how long and you still can't land a hit on me? Still can't evade me?" Izuku groaned softly as he tried to push himself up. The boy was feeling the pain of both his own injuries and whatever star accrued over time. "You really need to keep your guard up. The second someone touches your bare skin, you've already lost." Nesar waved his hand and Izuku was suddenly on his feet again. "You're not proving to me that you're ready to help Tamura. Maybe he's right, you should stay on the sidelines. Just be our healer." Izuku's head whipped up, his face twisted in a myriad of emotions, the most prominent being determination and anger. "I will not stay on the sidelines. I refuse to heal anyone if you hold me back. Then prove that you're strong enough to not be taken out." Izuku was just a child fighting against a timeless god. Whilst he was skilled in combat compared to the average citizen, even the average vigilante, he still had no chance against a man that had brought the Japanese underground to its knees multiple times over. And yet, Izuku persisted. The fight was far from fair, but it was feral all the same. Blood flew, most of which was the young healer's. Every single mark that Izuku left on the older man disappeared as soon as he brushed his protégé's skin. He was used to feeling invisible pain, was used to going about his day, but every adds up. It had been ages since he had to endure such a magnitude, he was starting to grow too comfortable. What do I need to do?" Under looked down at the small boy who was leaning heavily against the wall. His lips were bloody, bruises blooming across his face. His body shook ever so slightly with exertion. "What you need is an upgrade." Izuku's breath caught in his throat. "Tamura has the privilege of destroying everything he touches. But you are destroyed if you're touched." "I'm not destroyed." "Then you're able to function normally while taking on all of my injuries?" "Pain destroys you. This is nothing new, it's why you died the first time. You were unable to handle the pain and overdosed in an attempt to find a solution." Enstar knelt next to his ward. He pulled a pair of fine leather gloves on before helping the small boy his bandages back on. "These bandages are like trying to repair a broken swing with duct tape. It'll work in the moment, but everything will fall apart eventually." Izuku looked down at the bandages covering his arms. "Help me become stronger." Enstar smiled softly before pulling the tired boy into his arms. "Of course, my boy. That's what I'm here for." Taking care, he lifted Izuku up. "But for now, get some rest. I have much to get ready for you. You're not strong enough with just your quirk, we both know this after yesterday." After a night of rest, Mstr had come to Izuku's room. The boy was sitting in his bed while his pseudo-father sat in a chair next to him. Izuku's face and body was covered in bruises, adding to the invisible pain he always felt. "Because of that, I have a few quirks I wish to pass on to you." You're giving me more quirks? Isn't the regenerative one enough?" Izuku wasn't sure how to feel. He was excited at the thought of gaining more power that could help him achieve his goal, but he was being given the power to cover for his inadequacy. No matter how you paint the picture, your quirk isn't meant for combat. It actively works against you to help others. This is no fault of your own, Esther said as he pulled out a folder. "In here are the quirks I plan to give you. If you agree, I will give them to you now so we can begin practicing with them. Hopefully, you'll then be ready for the upcoming mission." Izuku took the folder with unsure hands. He opened it and began to read. Leap. Users of this quirk are able to horizontally leap distances up to 10x their height. Users of this quirk are also able to vertically jump distances up to 5x their height. Distance decreases with increased use. Drawbacks include sore muscles and high risk of ankle injuries. There is no physical indication for when the quirk is in use. I'm not touching you. Users of this quirk are able to create a weak force field around themselves. This force field will help prevent 3 selected items from touching the user. This field does not work on humans or animals. As a selected item starts to approach the user, it will slow down until eventually stopping. There is no physical indication for when the quirk is in use. Blood oath. If the user of this quirk is able to mix their own blood with another's, all pain and emotions are evenly split between the two for up to an hour. During this time, the two oath holders will be compelled to protect the other. At this time, it is uncertain whether the protective nature arises due to fear of pain or if it is caused by linked emotions. Only one oath can be active at any time. It cannot be broken prematurely by either party. Drawbacks include possibility of transmission of disease and a feeling of emptiness once the oath ends. The two oath holders are marked by a red sigil on the back of both hands. Do you agree to taking on these quirks? Izuku glanced between his mentor and the folder. Despite everything, Emistier had never steered him wrong before. He knew he could trust the man. Yes, I'll accept these from you. And with that, the future was sealed. Down in a small cemetery, a man dressed in black kneeled before a small grave. There was nothing particularly interesting about the plot of land. It was unassuming in all regards. There was a thick scent of decay in the air. It wasn't from the destruction of leaves in autumn, but rather from the death of flowers left at the graves. The man wearing black carefully pulled out a wilted and decaying bouquet away from the boy's grave that he was visiting. He carefully rearranged a fresh bunch of flowers, taking care to make sure the grave was properly decorated. The man in black pushed his hair out of his face, before wiping his eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything for you. I know you wouldn't want me to live with regrets, but it's all I can do at this point. Sad, isn't it? He chuckled weakly before bending over on himself. There was no one else in the cemetery. The man in black was utterly alone as he knelt at the grave. God, you were always so annoying, but still, I'd give anything to have you back again. Hisashi's not much better. A sharp gust of wind blew the man's hair into his face, but he didn't care in the slightest. The man was a regular visitor. He had come in much worse weather than clouds and whipping winds. His own comfort was nothing he considered when visiting his old friend. You all probably aren't surprised by this, but I won't be updating this FIC any longer. I started writing this while I was neck-deep in college and stressed beyond belief. People have asked about updates and I get it. I promised I would update, but I simply can't anymore. If anyone would like to continue this story with their own ideas/plot, go right ahead. I may come back to writing Nha in the future, but not this story. Thank you for reading and sorry again.